Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky, Part 1, Chapter 1. On an exceptionally hot evening, early in July, a young man came out of the garret in which he lodged in S Place, and walked slowly, as though in hesitation, towards K Bridge. He had successfully avoided meeting his landlady on the staircase. His garret was under the roof of a high, 5-storied house, and was more like a cupboard than a room. The landlady, who provided him with garret, dinners, and attendance, lived on the floor below, and every time he went out, he was obliged to pass her kitchen, the door of which invariably stood open, and each time he passed, the young man had a sick, frightened feeling, which made him scowl and feel ashamed. He was hopelessly in debt to his landlady, and was afraid of meeting her. This was not because he was cowardly and abject, quite the contrary, but for some time past he had been in an overstrained, irritable condition, verging on hypochondria. He had become so completely absorbed in himself and isolated from his fellows that he dreaded meeting not only his landlady, but anyone at all. He was crushed by poverty, but the anxieties of his position had of late ceased to weigh upon him. He had given up attending to matters of practical importance. He had lost all desire to do so. Nothing that any landlady could do had a real terror for him. But to be stopped on the stairs, to be forced to listen to her trivial, irrelevant gossip, to pestering demands for payment, threats and complaints, and to rack his brains for excuses, to prevaricate, to lie. No, rather than that, he would creep down the stairs like a cat and slip out unseen. Are you? This evening, however, on coming out into the street, he became acutely aware of his fears. I want to attempt a thing like that, and am frightened by these trifles, he thought, with an odd smile. Yes, all is in a man's hands, and he lets it all slip from cowardice. That's an axiom. It would be interesting to know what it is men are most afraid of. Taking a new step, uttering a new word, is what they fear most. But I am talking too much. It's because I chatter that I do nothing. Or perhaps it is that I chatter because I do nothing. I've learned to chatter this last month, lying for days together in my den thinking of Jack the Giant Killer. Why am I going there now? Am I capable of that? Is that serious? It is not serious at all. It's simply a fantasy to amuse myself. A plaything. Yes, maybe it is a plaything. The heat in the street was terrible, and the airlessness, the bustle and the plaster, scaffolding, bricks and dust all about him, and that special Petersburg stench, so familiar to all who are unable to get out of town in summer, all worked painfully upon the young man's already overwrought nerves. The insufferable stench from the pot-houses, which are particularly numerous in that part of the town, and the drunken men whom he met continually, although it was a working day, completed the revolting misery of the picture. An expression of the profoundest disgust gleamed for a moment in the young man's refined face. He was, by the way, exceptionally handsome, above the average in height, slim, well-built, with beautiful dark eyes and dark brown hair. Soon he sank into deep thought, or more accurately speaking, into a complete blankness of mind. He walked along, not observing what was about him, and not caring to observe it. From time to time he would mutter something, from the habit of talking to himself, to which he had just confessed. At these moments he would become conscious that his ideas were sometimes in a tangle, and that he was very weak. For 2 days he had scarcely tasted food. He was so badly dressed that even a man accustomed to shabbiness would have been ashamed to be seen in the street in such rags. In that quarter of the town, however, scarcely any shortcoming in dress would have created surprise. Owing to the proximity of the Haymarket, the number of establishments of bad character, the preponderance of the trading and working class population crowded in these streets and alleys in the heart of Petersburg, types so various were to be seen in the streets that no figure, however queer, would have caused surprise. But there was such accumulated bitterness and contempt in the young man's heart that, in spite of all the fastidiousness of youth, he minded his rags least of all in the street. It was a different matter when he met with acquaintances, or with former fellow students, whom indeed he disliked meeting at any time. And yet, when a drunken man, who, for some unknown reason, was being taken somewhere in a huge wagon, dragged by a heavy dray horse, suddenly shouted at him as he drove past, "Hey there, German hatter!" bawling at the top of his voice and pointing at the top of his voice and pointing at him, the young man stopped suddenly and clutched tremulously at his hat. It was a tall round hat from Zimmermann's, but completely worn out, rusty with age, all torn and bespattered, brimless and bent on one side in a most unseemly fashion. Not shame, however, but quite another feeling akin to terror had overtaken him. "I knew it," he muttered in confusion. "I thought so. That's the worst of all. Why, a stupid thing like this, the most trivial detail, might spoil the whole plan. Yes, my hat is too noticeable. It looks absurd, and that makes it noticeable. With my rags, I ought to wear a cap, any sort of old pancake, but not this grotesque thing. Nobody wears such a hat. It would be noticed a mile off. It would be remembered. What matters is that people would remember it, and that would give them a clue. For this business, one should be as little conspicuous as possible. Trifles are what matter. Why, it's just such trifles that always ruin everything." He had not far to go. He knew indeed how many steps it was from the gate of his lodging-house. Exactly 730. He had counted them once when he had been lost in dreams. At the time he had put no faith in those dreams, and was only tantalizing himself by their hideous but daring recklessness. Now, a month later, he had begun to look upon them differently, and in spite of the monologues in which he jeered at his own impotence and indecision, he had involuntarily come to regard this hideous dream as an exploit to be attempted. Although he still did not realize this himself, he was positively going now for a rehearsal of his project, and at every step his excitement grew more and more violent. With a sinking heart and a nervous tremor, he went up to a huge house which on one side looked onto the canal and on the other into the street. This house was let out in tiny tenements and was inhabited by working people of all kinds: tailors, locksmiths, cooks, Germans of sorts, girls picking up a living as best they could, petty clerks, etc. There was a continual coming and going through the two gates, and in the two courtyards of the house 3 or 4 doorkeepers were employed on the building. The young man was very glad to meet none of them, and at once slipped unnoticed through the door on the right and up the staircase. It was a back staircase, dark and narrow, but he was familiar with it already and knew his way, and he liked all these surroundings. In such darkness, even the most inquisitive eyes were not to be dreaded. If I am so scared now, what would it be if it somehow came to pass that I were really going to do it? He could not help asking himself as he reached the 4th story. There his progress was barred by some porters who were engaged in moving furniture out of a flat. He knew that the flat had been occupied by a German clerk in the civil service and his family. This German was moving out then, and so the 4th floor on this staircase would be untenanted except by the old woman. "That's a good thing, anyway," he thought to himself as he rang the bell of the old woman's flat. The bell gave a faint tinkle, as though it were made of tin and not of copper. The little flats in such houses always have bells that ring like that. He had forgotten the note of that bell, and now its peculiar tinkle seemed to remind him of something and to bring it clearly before him. He started. His nerves were terribly overstrained by now. In a little while, the door was opened a tiny crack. The old woman eyed her visitor with evident distrust through the crack, and nothing could be seen but her little eyes, glittering in the darkness. But, seeing a number of people on the landing, she grew bolder and opened the door wide. The young man stepped into the dark entry, which was partitioned off from the tiny kitchen. The old woman stood facing him in silence and looking inquiringly at him. She was a diminutive, withered-up old woman of 60, with sharp, malignant eyes and a sharp little nose. Her colourless, somewhat grizzled hair was thickly smeared with oil, and she wore no kerchief over it. Round her thin long neck, which looked like a hen's leg, was knotted some sort of flannel rag, and in spite of the heat there hung flapping on her shoulders a mangy fur cape, yellow with age. The old woman coughed and groaned at every instant. The young man must have looked at her with a rather peculiar expression, for a gleam of mistrust came into her eyes again. Raskolnikov, a student. I came here a month ago, the young man made haste to mutter, with a half-bow, remembering that he ought to be more polite. I remember, my good sir, I remember quite well your coming here, the old woman said distinctly, still keeping her inquiring eyes on his face. And here I am again on the same errand, Raskolnikov continued, a little disconcerted and surprised at the old woman's mistrust. Perhaps she is always like that, though, only I did not notice it the other time, he thought with an uneasy feeling. The old woman paused, as though hesitating, then stepped on one side, and pointing to the door of the room, she said, letting her visitor pass in front of her, "Step in, my good sir." The little room into which the young man walked, with yellow paper on the walls, geraniums and muslin curtains in the windows, was brightly lighted up at that moment by the setting sun. "So, the sun will shine like this then too," flashed as it were by chance through Raskolnikov's mind, and with a rapid glance he scanned everything in the room, trying as far as possible to notice and remember its arrangement. But there was nothing special in the room. The furniture, all very old and of yellow wood, consisted of a sofa with a huge bent wooden back, an oval table in front of the sofa, a dressing table with a looking-glass fixed on it between the windows, chairs along the walls, and 2 or 3 half-penny prints in yellow frames, representing German damsels with birds in their hands. That was all. In the corner, a light was burning before a small icon. Everything was very clean. The floor and the furniture were brightly polished. Everything shone. Lizaveta's work, thought the young man. There was not a speck of dust to be seen in the whole flat. In the houses of spiteful old widows that one finds such cleanliness. Raskolnikov thought again, and he stole a curious glance at the cotton curtain over the door leading into another tiny room, in which stood the old woman's bed and chest of drawers, and into which he had never looked before. These 2 rooms made up the whole flat. "What do you want?" the old woman said severely, coming into the room, and as before standing in front of him so as to look him straight in the face. "I've brought something to pawn here," and he drew out of his pocket an old-fashioned flat silver watch, on the back of which was engraved a globe. The chain was of steel. "But the time is up for your last pledge. The month was up the day before yesterday. I will bring you the interest for another month. Wait a little." "But that's for me to do as I please, my good sir, to wait or to sell your pledge at once." "How much will you give me for the watch, Alyona Ivanovna?" "You come with such trifles, my good sir. It's scarcely worth anything. I gave you 2 roubles last time for your ring, and one could buy it quite new at a jeweller's for 1.5 roubles. Give me 4 roubles for it. I shall redeem it. It was my father's. I shall be getting some money soon. 1.5 roubles, and interest in advance, if you like." 1.5 roubles, cried the young man. "Please yourself." And the old woman handed him back the watch. The young man took it, and was so angry that he was on the point of going away, but checked himself at once, remembering that there was nowhere else he could go, and that he had had another object also in coming. "Hand it over," he said roughly. The old woman fumbled in her pocket for her keys, and disappeared behind the curtain into the other room. The young man, left standing alone in the middle of the room, listened inquisitively, thinking. He could hear her unlocking the chest of drawers. It must be the top drawer, he reflected. So she carries the keys in a pocket on the right, all in one bunch on a steel ring, and there's one key there, 3 times as big as all the others, with deep notches. That can't be the key of the chest of drawers. Then there must be some other chest or strong box. That's worth knowing. Strong boxes always have keys like that, but how degrading it all is. The old woman came back. Here, sir, as we say 10 kopecks, the rouble a month. So I must take 15 kopecks from a rouble and a half for the month in advance. But for the 2 roubles I lent you before, you owe me now 20 kopecks on the same reckoning in advance. That makes 35 kopecks altogether. So I must give you a rouble and 15 kopecks for the watch. Here it is. What? Only a rouble and 15 kopecks now? Just so. The young man did not dispute it, and took the money. He looked at the old woman, and was in no hurry to get away, as though there was still something he wanted to say or to do. But he did not himself quite know what. I may be bringing you something else in a day or two, Alyona Ivanovna. A valuable thing. Silver, a cigarette box, as soon as I get it back from a friend. He broke off in confusion. Well, we will talk about it then, sir. Goodbye. Are you always at home alone? Your sister is not here with you? He asked her as casually as possible as he went out into the passage. What business is she of yours, my good sir? Oh, nothing particular. I simply ask. You are too quick. Good day, Alyona Ivanovna. Raskolnikov went out in complete confusion. This confusion became more and more intense. As he went down the stairs, he even stopped short 2 or 3 times, as though suddenly struck by some thought. When he was in the street, he cried out, "Oh God, how loathsome it all is! And can I possibly? No, it's nonsense, it's rubbish," he added resolutely. And how could such an atrocious thing come into my head? What filthy things my heart is capable of! Yes, filthy above all, disgusting, loathsome, loathsome. And for a whole month I've been. But no words, no exclamations could express his agitation. The feeling of intense repulsion which had begun to oppress and torture his heart while he was on his way to the old woman had by now reached such a pitch and had taken such a definite form that he did not know what to do with himself to escape from his wretchedness. He walked along the pavement like a drunken man, regardless of the passers-by, and jostling against them, and only came to his senses when he was in the next street. Looking round, he noticed that he was standing close to a tavern which was entered by steps leading from the pavement to the basement. At that instant, 2 drunken men came out at the door, and abusing and supporting one another, they mounted the steps. Without stopping to think, Raskolnikov went down the steps at once. Till that moment he had never been into a tavern, but now he felt giddy and was tormented by a burning thirst. He longed for a drink of cold beer, and attributed his sudden weakness to the want of food. He sat down at a sticky little table in a dark and dirty corner, ordered some beer, and eagerly drank off the first glassful. At once he felt easier, and his thoughts became clear. "All that's nonsense," he said hopefully, "and there is nothing in it all to worry about. It's simply physical derangement. Just a glass of beer, a piece of dry bread, and in one moment the brain is stronger, the mind is clearer, and the will is firm. Phew! How utterly petty it all is." But in spite of this scornful reflection, he was by now looking cheerful, as though he were suddenly set free from a terrible burden, and he gazed round in a friendly way at the people in the room. But even at that moment he had a dim foreboding that this happier frame of mind was also not normal. There were few people at the time in the tavern, besides the 2 drunken men he had met on the steps. A group consisting of about 5 men and a girl with a concertina had gone out at the same time. Their departure left the room quiet and rather empty. The persons still in the tavern were a man who appeared to be an artisan, drunk but not extremely so, sitting before a pot of beer, and his companion, a huge stout man with a grey beard, in a short full-skirted coat. He was very drunk and had dropped asleep on the bench. Every now and then he began as though in his sleep, cracking his fingers with his arms wide apart and the upper part of his body bounding about on the bench, while he hummed some meaningless refrain, trying to recall some such lines as these. His wife, a year, he fondly loved his wife, a year he fondly loved, or suddenly waking up again. Walking along the crowded row, he met the one he used to know, but no one shared his enjoyment. His silent companion looked with positive hostility and mistrust at all these manifestations. There was another man in the room who looked somewhat like a retired government clerk. He was sitting apart, now and then sipping from his pot and looking round at the company. He, too, appeared to be in some agitation. Chapter 2. Raskolnikov was not used to crowds, and as we said before, he avoided society of every sort, more especially of late. But now, all at once, he felt a desire to be with other people. Something new seemed to be taking place within him, and with it he felt a sort of thirst for company. He was so weary, after a whole month of concentrated wretchedness and gloomy excitement, that he longed to rest, if only for a moment, in some other world, whatever it might be. And in spite of the filthiness of the surroundings, he was glad now to stay in the tavern. The master of the establishment was in another room, but he frequently came down some steps into the main room, his jaunty tarred boots with red turn overtops coming into view each time before the rest of his person. He wore a full coat and a horribly greasy black satin waistcoat with no cravat, and his whole face seemed smeared with oil like an iron lock. At the counter stood a boy of about 14, and there was another boy somewhat younger who handed whatever was wanted. On the counter lay some sliced cucumber, some pieces of dried black bread, and some fish chopped up small, all smelling very bad. It was insufferably close, and so heavy with the fumes of spirits, that 5 minutes in such an atmosphere might well make a man drunk. There are chance meetings with strangers that interest us from the first moment, before a word is spoken. Such was the impression made on Raskolnikov by the person sitting a little distance from him, who looked like a retired clerk. The young man often recalled this impression afterwards, and even ascribed it to presentiment. He looked repeatedly at the clerk, partly, no doubt, because the latter was staring persistently at him, obviously anxious to enter into conversation. At the other persons in the room, including the tavern-keeper, the clerk looked as though he were used to their company and weary of it, showing a shade of condescending contempt for them, as persons of station and culture inferior to his own, without whom it would be useless for him to converse. He was a man over 50, bald and grizzled, of medium height, and stoutly built. His face, bloated from continual drinking, was of a yellow, even greenish, tinge, with swollen eyelids out of which keen reddish eyes gleamed like little chinks. But there was something very strange in him. There was a light in his eyes as though of intense feeling. Perhaps there were even thought and intelligence, but at the same time there was a gleam of something like madness. He was wearing an old and hopelessly ragged black dress coat, with all its buttons missing except one, and that one he had buttoned, evidently clinging to this last trace of respectability. A crumpled shirt, front, covered with spots and stains, protruded from his canvas waistcoat. Like a clerk, he wore no beard nor moustache, but had been so long unshaven that his chin looked like a stiff greyish brush, and there was something respectable and like an official about his manner too. But he was restless. He ruffled up his hair, and from time to time let his head drop into his hands, dejectedly resting his ragged elbows on the stained and sticky table. At last he looked straight at Raskolnikov and said loudly and resolutely, "May I venture, honoured sir, to engage you in polite conversation? Forasmuch as, though your exterior would not command respect, my experience admonishes me that you are a man of education, and not accustomed to drinking. I have always respected education, when in conjunction with genuine sentiments, and I am besides a titular counsellor in rank. Marmeladov, such is my name. Titular counsellor. I make bold to inquire, have you been in the service? No, I am studying, answered the young man, somewhat surprised at the grandiloquent style of the speaker, and also at being so directly addressed. In spite of the momentary desire he had just been feeling for company of any sort, on being actually spoken to, he felt immediately his habitual irritable and uneasy aversion for any stranger who approached or attempted to approach him. A student then, or formerly a student? Cried the clerk. Just what I thought. I am a man of experience, immense experience, sir. And he tapped his forehead with his fingers in self-approval. You've been a student or have attended some learned institution, but allow me. He got up, staggered, took up his jug and glass, and sat down beside the young man, facing him a little sideways. He was drunk, but spoke fluently and boldly, only occasionally losing the thread of his sentences and drawling his words. Honoured sir, he began, almost with solemnity, poverty is not a vice, that's a true saying. Yet I know too that drunkenness is not a virtue, and that's even truer. But beggary, honoured sir, beggary is a vice. In poverty you may still retain your innate nobility of soul, but in beggary, never. No one. For beggary a man is not chased out of human society with a stick. He is swept out with a broom, so as to make it as humiliating as possible, and quite right, too. Forasmuch as in beggary I am ready to be the first to humiliate myself. Hence the pothouse. Honoured sir, a month ago, Mr. Lebeziatnikov gave my wife a beating, and my wife is a very different matter from me. Do you understand? Allow me to ask you another question out of simple curiosity. Have you ever spent a night on a hay barge on the Neva? No, I have not happened to, answered Raskolnikov. What do you mean? Well, I've just come from one, and it's the 5th night I've slept so. He filled his glass, emptied it, and paused. Bits of hay were in fact clinging to his clothes and sticking to his hair. It seemed quite probable that he had not undressed or washed for the last 5 days. His hands particularly were filthy. They were fat and red, with black nails. His conversation seemed to excite a general though languid interest. The boys at the counter fell to sniggering. The innkeeper came down from the upper room, apparently on purpose to listen to the funny fellow, and sat down at a little distance, yawning lazily, but with dignity. Evidently Marmeladov was a familiar figure here, and he had most likely acquired his weakness for high-flown speeches from the habit of frequently entering into conversation with strangers of all sorts in the tavern. This habit develops into a necessity in some drunkards, and especially in those who are looked after sharply and kept in order at home. Hence, in the company of other drinkers, they try to justify themselves, and even if possible obtain consideration. Funny fellow, pronounced the innkeeper, and why don't you work? Why aren't you at your duty if you are in the service? Why am I not at my duty, honoured sir? Marmeladov went on, addressing himself exclusively to Raskolnikov, as though it had been he who put that question to him. Why am I not at my duty? Does not my heart ache to think what a useless worm I am? A month ago, when Mr. Lebeziatnikov beat my wife with his own hands, and I lay drunk, didn't I suffer? Excuse me, young man, has it ever happened to you? Well, to petition hopelessly for a loan? Yes, it has. But what do you mean by hopelessly? Hopelessly, in the fullest sense, when you know beforehand that you will get nothing by it. You know, for instance, beforehand, with positive certainty, that this man, this most reputable and exemplary citizen, will on no consideration give you money. And indeed I ask you, why should he? For he knows, of course, that I shan't pay it back. From compassion. But Mr. Lebeziatnikov, who keeps up with modern ideas, explained the other day that compassion is forbidden nowadays by science itself, and that's what is done now in England, where there is political economy. Why, I ask you, should he give it to me? And yet, though I know beforehand that he won't, I set off to him, and why do you go? Put in Raskolnikov, add she. Well, when one has no one, nowhere else one can go, for every man must have somewhere to go, since there are times when one absolutely must go somewhere. When my own daughter first went out with a yellow ticket, then I had to go, for my daughter has a yellow passport, he added in parenthesis, looking with a certain uneasiness at the young man. No matter, sir, no matter, he went on hurriedly, and with apparent composure, when both the boys at the counter guffawed, and even the innkeeper smiled. No matter, I am not confounded by the wagging of their heads, for everyone knows everything about it already, and all that is secret is made open, and I accept it all, not with contempt, but with humility. So be it, so be it. Behold the man. Excuse me, young man, can you? No, to put it more strongly and more distinctly. Not can you, but dare you, looking upon me, assert that I am not a pig. The young man did not answer a word, while the orator began again stolidly and with even increased dignity, after waiting for the laughter in the room to subside. Well, so be it, I am a pig, but she is a lady. I have the semblance of a beast, but Katerina Ivanovna, my spouse, is a person of education and an officer's daughter. Granted, granted, I am a scoundrel, but she is a woman of a noble heart, full of sentiments refined by education, and yet, oh, if only she felt for me. Honoured sir, you know every man ought to have at least one place where people feel for him. But Katerina Ivanovna, though she is magnanimous, she is unjust, and yet, although I realize that when she pulls my hair, she only does it out of pity. For I repeat, without being ashamed, she pulls my hair, young man, he declared with redoubled dignity, hearing the sniggering again. But my God, if she would but bigness it once! But no, it's all in vain, and it's no use talking, for more than once my wish did come true, and more than once she has felt for me, but such is my fate, and I am a beast by nature. Rather, assented the innkeeper, yawning. Marmeladov struck his fist resolutely on the table. Such is my fate. Do you know, sir? Do you know? I have sold her very stockings for drink, not her shoes. That would be more or less in the order of things. But her stockings, I have sold for drink. Her mohair shawl I sold for drink, a present to her long ago, her own property, not mine. And we live in a cold room, and she caught cold this winter, and has begun coughing and spitting blood, too. We have 3 little children, and Katerina Ivanovna is at work from morning till night. She is scrubbing and cleaning and washing the children, for she's been used to cleanliness from a child. But her chest is weak, and she has a tendency to consumption, and I feel it. Do you suppose I don't feel it? And the more I drink, the more I feel it. That's why I drink too. I try to find sympathy and feeling in drink. I drink so that I may suffer twice as much. And as though in despair he laid his head down on the table. Young man, he went on, raising his head again, in your face I seem to read some trouble of mind. When you came in I read it, and that was why I addressed you at once, for in unfolding to you the story of my life, I do not wish to make myself a laughing-stock before these idle listeners, who indeed know all about it already, but I am looking for a man of feeling and education. Know, then, that my wife was educated in a high-class school for the daughters of noblemen, and on leaving she danced the shawl, danced before the governor and other personages, for which she was presented with a gold medal and a certificate of merit. The medal, well, the medal of course was sold long ago, but the certificate of merit is in her trunk still, and not long ago she showed it to our landlady, and although she is most continually on bad terms with the landlady, Yet she wanted to tell someone or other of her past honors and of the happy days that are gone. I don't condemn her for it. I don't blame her, for the one thing left her is recollection of the past, and all the rest is dust and ashes. Yes, yes, she is a lady of spirit, proud and determined. She scrubs the floors herself, and has nothing but black bread to eat, but won't allow herself to be treated with disrespect. That's why she would not overlook Mr. Lebeziatnikov's rudeness to her, and so when he gave her a beating for it, she took to her bed more from the hurt to her feelings than from the blows. She was a widow when I married her, with 3 children, one smaller than the other. She married her first husband, an infantry officer, for love, and ran away with him from her father's house. She was exceedingly fond of her husband, but he gave way to cards, got into trouble, and with that he died. He used to beat her at the end, and although she paid him back, of which I have authentic documentary evidence, to this day she speaks of him with tears, and she throws him up to me. And I am glad that, though only in imagination, she should think of herself as having once been happy. And she was left at his death with 3 children in a wild and remote district where I happened to be at the time. And she was left in such hopeless poverty that although I have seen many ups and downs of all sort, I don't feel equal to describing it. Even her relations had all thrown her off, and she was proud too, excessively proud. And then, honoured sir, and then I, being at the time a widower with a daughter of 14, left me by my first wife, offered her my hand, for I could not bear the sight of such suffering. You can judge the extremity of her calamities, that she, a woman of education and culture, and distinguished family, should have consented to be my wife, but she did, weeping and sobbing, and wringing her hands. She married me, for she had nowhere to turn. Do you understand, sir? Do you understand what it means when you have absolutely nowhere to turn? No, that you don't understand yet. And for a whole year I performed my duties conscientiously and faithfully, and did not touch this. He tapped the jug with his finger, for I have feelings, but even so, I could not please her, and then I lost my place too, and that through no fault of mine, but through changes in the office, and then I did touch it. It will be a year and a half ago soon, since we found ourselves at last, after many wanderings, and numerous calamities in this magnificent capital, adorned with innumerable monuments. Here I obtained a situation. I obtained it, and I lost it again. Do you understand? This time it was through my own fault I lost it, for my weakness had come out. We have now part of a room at Amalia Fyodorovna Lipivexel's, and what we live upon, and what we pay our rent with, I could not say. There are a lot of people living there besides ourselves. Dirt and disorder, a perfect bedlam. Yes, and meanwhile, my daughter by my first wife has grown up, and what my daughter has had to put up with from her stepmother whilst she was growing up, I won't speak of, for though Katerina Ivanovna is full of generous feelings, she is a spirited lady, irritable and short-tempered. Yes, but it's no use going over that. Sonia, as you may well fancy, has had no education. I did make an effort 4 years ago to give her a course of geography and universal history, but as I was not very well up in those subjects myself, and we had no suitable books, and what books we had! Anyway, we have not even those now, so all our instruction came to an end. We stopped at Cyrus of Persia. Since she has attained years of maturity, she has read other books of romantic tendency, and of late she had read with great interest a book she got through Mr. Lebeziatnikov, Lou's Physiology. Do you know it? And even recounted extracts from it to us, and that's the whole of her education. And now, may I venture to address you, honoured sir, on my own account with a private question. Do you suppose that a respectable poor girl can earn much by honest work? Not 15 farthings a day can she earn, if she is respectable, and has no special talent, and that without putting her work down for an instant. And what's more, Ivan Ivanitch Klopstock, the civil councillor, have you heard of him? Has not, to this day, paid her for the half-dozen linen shirts she made him, and drove her roughly away, stamping and reviling her, on the pretext that the shirt collars were not made like the pattern and were put in askew. And there are the little ones hungry. And Katerina Ivanovna walking up and down and wringing her hands, her cheeks flushed red, as they always are in that disease. Here you live with us, says she. You eat and drink, and are kept warm, and you do nothing to help. And much she gets to eat and drink when there is not a crust for the little ones, for 3 days. I was lying at the time. Well, what of it? I was lying drunk, and I heard my Sonia speaking. She is a gentle creature with a soft little voice, fair hair, and such a pale, thin little face. She said, Katerina Ivanovna, am I really to do a thing like that? And Darya Fransovna, a woman of evil character, and very well known to the police, had 2 or 3 times tried to get at her through the landlady. And why not? Said Katerina Ivanovna with a jeer. You are something mighty precious to be so careful of. But don't blame her. Don't blame her, honoured sir. Don't blame her. She was not herself when she spoke, but driven to distraction by her illness and the crying of the hungry children, and it was said more to wound her than anything else, for that's Katerina Ivanovna's character, and when children cry, even from hunger, she falls to beating them at once. At 6 o'clock I saw Sonia get up, put on her kerchief and her cape, and go out of the room, and about 9 o'clock she came back. She walked straight up to Katerina Ivanovna, and she laid 30 roubles on the table before her in silence. She did not utter a word. She did not even look at her. She simply picked up our big green draped-dame shawl. We have a shawl made of draped-dames, put it over her head and face, and lay down on the bed with her face to the wall. Only her little shoulders and her body kept shuddering, and I went on lying there, just as before. And then I saw, young man, I saw Katerina Ivanovna, in the same silence, go up to Sonia's little bed. She was on her knees all the evening, kissing Sonia's feet, and would not get up, and then they both fell asleep in each other's arms, together. Yes, and I lay drunk. Marmeladov stopped short as though his voice had failed him. Then he hurriedly filled his glass, drank, and cleared his throat. Since then, sir, he went on after a brief pause, since then, owing to an unfortunate occurrence, and through information given by evil-intentioned persons, in all which Darya Fransovna took a leading part, on the pretext that she had been treated with want of respect, since then, my daughter, Sofya Semyonovna, has been forced to take a yellow ticket, and owing to that she is unable to go on living with us, for our landlady, Amalia Fyodorovna, would not hear of it, though she had backed up Darya Fransovna before, and Mr. Lebeziatnikov too. All the trouble between him and Katerina Ivanovna was on Sonia's account. At first he was for making up to Sonia himself, and then all of a sudden he stood on his dignity. How, said he, can a highly educated man like me live in the same rooms with a girl like that? And Katerina Ivanovna would not let it pass. She stood up for her. And so that's how it happened. And Sonia comes to us now, mostly after dark. She comforts Katerina Ivanovna and gives her all she can. She has a room at the Kapernamovs, the tailors. She lodges with them. Kapernamov is a lame man with a cleft palate, and all of his numerous family have cleft palates too. And his wife, too, has a cleft palate. They all live in one room, but Sonia has her own, partitioned off. Yes, very poor people, and all with cleft palates. Yes. Then I got up in the morning, and put on my rags, lifted up my hands to heaven, and set off to His Excellency, Ivan Afanasievich. His Excellency, Ivan Afanasievich. Do you know him? No? Well then, it's a man of God you don't know. He is wax, wax before the face of the Lord, even as wax melteth. His eyes were dim when he heard my story. Marmeladov, once already you have deceived my expectations. I'll take you once more on my own responsibility. That's what he said. Remember, he said, and now you can go. I kissed the dust at his feet, in thought only, for in reality he would not have allowed me to do it, being a statesman and a man of modern political and enlightened ideas. I returned home, and when I announced that I'd been taken back into the service and should receive a salary, heavens, what a to-do there was. Marmeladov stopped again in violent excitement. At that moment, a whole party of revellers, already drunk, came in from the street, and the sounds of a hired concertina and the cracked piping voice of a child of 7 singing the Hamlet were heard in the entry. The room was filled with noise. The tavern-keeper and the boys were busy with the newcomers. Marmeladov, paying no attention to the new arrivals, continued his story. He appeared by now to be extremely weak, but as he became more and more drunk, he became more and more talkative. The recollection of his recent success in getting the situation seemed to revive him, and was positively reflected in a sort of radiance on his face. Raskolnikov listened attentively. That was 5 weeks ago, sir. Yes, as soon as Katerina Ivanovna and Sonia heard of it. Mercy on us. It was as though I stepped into the kingdom of heaven. It used to be, you can lie like a beast, nothing but abuse. Now they were walking on tiptoe, hushing the children. Semyon Zaharovitch is tired with his work at the office. He's resting. They made me coffee before I went to work and boiled cream for me. They began to get real cream for me. Do you hear that? And how they managed to get together the money for a decent outfit? 11 rubles, 50 kopecks, I can't guess. Boots, cotton shirt fronts, most magnificent, a uniform. They got up all in splendid style for 11 rubles and a half. The first morning I came back from the office, I found Katerina Ivanovna had cooked 2 courses for dinner, soup and salt meat with horseradish, which we had never dreamed of till then. She had not any dresses, none at all, but she got herself up as though she were going on a visit, and not that she'd anything to do it with. She smartened herself up with nothing at all. She'd done her hair nicely, put on a clean collar of some sort, cuffs, and there she was, quite a different person. She was younger and better looking. Sonia, my little darling, had only helped with money for the time, she said. It won't do for me to come and see you too often. After dark, maybe when no one can see. Do you hear? Do you hear? I lay down for a nap after dinner, and what do you think? Though Katerina Ivanovna had quarrelled to the last degree with our landlady, Amalia Fyodorovna, only a week before, she could not resist then asking her in to coffee. For 2 hours they were sitting, whispering together. Semyon Zaharovitch is in the service again now, and receiving a salary, says she. And he went himself to His Excellency, and His Excellency himself came out to him, made all the others wait, and led Semyon Zaharovitch by the hand before everybody into his study. Do you hear? Do you hear? To be sure, says he. Semyon Zaharovitch, remembering your past services, says he, and in spite of your propensity to that foolish weakness, since you promise now, and since, moreover, we've got on badly without you. Do you hear? Do you hear? And do you hear? So, says he, I rely now on your word as a gentleman, and all that. Let me tell you, she has simply made up for herself, and not simply out of wantonness, for the sake of bragging. No, she believes it all herself. She amuses herself with her own fancies. Upon my word she does, and I don't blame her for it. No, I don't blame her. 6 days ago, when I brought her my first earnings in full, 23 rubles, 40 kopecks altogether, she called me her poppet. Poppet, said she, my little poppet. And when we were by ourselves, you understand, you would not think me a beauty. You would not think much of me as a husband, would you? Well, she pinched my cheek. My little poppet, said she. Marmeladov broke off, tried to smile, but suddenly his chin began to twitch. He controlled himself, however. The tavern, the degraded appearance of the man, the 5 nights in the hay barge, and the pot of spirits, and yet this poignant love for his wife and children bewildered his listener. Raskolnikov listened intently, but with a sick sensation. He felt vexed that he had come here. Honoured sir, cried Marmeladov, recovering himself. Oh, sir, perhaps all this seems a laughing matter to you, as it does to others, and perhaps I am only worrying you with the stupidity of all the trivial details of my home life. But it is not a laughing matter to me, for I can feel it all. And the whole of that heavenly day of my life, and the whole of that evening, I passed in fleeting dreams of how I would arrange it all, and how I would dress all the children, and how I should give her rest, and how I should rescue my own daughter from dishonour, and restore her to the bosom of her family, and a great deal more. Quite excusable, sir. Well then, sir. Marmeladov suddenly gave a sort of start, raised his head and gazed intently at his listener. Well, on the very next day after all those dreams, that is to say, exactly 5 days ago in the evening, by a cunning trick, like a thief in the night, I stole from Katerina Ivanovna the key of her box, took out what was left of my earnings. How much it was I have forgotten. And now look at me, all of you. It's the 5th day since I left home, and they are looking for me there, and it's the end of my employment, and my uniform is lying in a tavern on the Egyptian bridge. I exchanged it for the garments I have on, and it's the end of everything. Marmeladov struck his forehead with his fist, clenched his teeth, closed his eyes, and leaned heavily with his elbow on the table. But a minute later his face suddenly changed, and with a certain assumed slyness and affectation of bravado, he glanced at Raskolnikov, laughed, and said, "This morning I went to see Sonia. I went to ask her for a pick-me-up." "You don't say she gave it to you?" cried one of the newcomers. He shouted the words, and went off into a guffaw. "This very quart was bought with her money," Marmeladov declared, addressing himself exclusively to Raskolnikov. 30 kopecks she gave me with her own hands, her last, all she had, as I saw. She said nothing, she only looked at me without a word. Not on earth, but up yonder. They grieve over men, they weep, but they don't blame them, but it hurts more when they don't blame. 30 kopecks, yes, and maybe she needs them now, eh? What do you think, my dear sir? For now, she's got to keep up her appearance. It costs money, that smartness, that special smartness, you know. Do you understand? And there's pomatum too, you see. She must have things. Petticoats, starched ones, shoes too, real jaunty ones to show off her foot when she has to step over a puddle. Do you understand, sir? Do you understand what all that smartness means? And here I, her own father, here I took 30 kopecks of that money for a drink, and I am drinking it, and I have already drunk it. Come, who will have pity on a man like me, eh? Are you sorry for me, sir, or not? Tell me, sir, are you sorry or not? He would have filled his glass, but there was no drink left. The pot was empty. What are you to be pitied for? Shouted the tavern-keeper, who was again near them. Shouts of laughter and even oaths followed. The laughter and the oaths came from those who were listening, and also from those who had heard nothing, but were simply looking at the figure of the discharged government clerk. "Why am I to be pitied?" Marmeladov suddenly declaimed, standing up with his arm outstretched, as though he had been only waiting for that question. "Why am I to be pitied, you say? Yes, there's nothing to pity me for. I ought to be crucified on a cross, not pitied. Crucify me, O judge, crucify me, but pity me, and then I will go of myself to be crucified. For it's not merry-making I seek, but tears and tribulation, Do you suppose, you that sell, that this pint of yours has been sweet to me? It was tribulation I sought at the bottom of it, tears and tribulation, and have found it, and I have tasted it. But he will pity us who has had pity on all men, who has understood all men and all things. He is the one. He too is the judge. He will come in that day, and he will ask, where is the daughter who gave herself for her cross, consumptive stepmother, and for the little children of another? Where is the daughter who had pity upon the filthy drunkard, her earthly father, undismayed by his beastliness? And he will say, come to me, I have already forgiven thee once. I have forgiven thee once. Thy sins, which are many, are forgiven thee, for thou hast loved much. And he will forgive, my Sonia. He will forgive. I know it. I felt it in my heart when I was with her just now. And he will judge and will forgive all, the good and the evil, the wise and the meek. And when he has done with all of them, then he will summon us. You too come forth, he will say. Come forth, ye drunkards. Come forth, ye weak ones. Come forth, ye children of shame. And we shall all come forth without shame, and shall stand before him. And he will say unto us, Ye are swine, made in the image of the beast, and with his mark. But come ye also. And the wise ones, and those of understanding, will say, O Lord, why dost thou receive these men? And he will say, this is why I receive them, O ye wise. This is why I receive them, O ye of understanding, that not one of them believed himself to be worthy of this. And he will hold out his hands to us, and we shall fall down before him, and we shall weep, and we shall understand all things. Then we shall understand all, and all will understand, Katerina Ivanovna even. She will understand. Lord, thy kingdom come. And he sank down on the bench, exhausted and helpless, looking at no one, apparently oblivious of his surroundings, and plunged in deep thought. His words had created a certain impression. There was a moment of silence, but soon laughter and oaths were heard again. That's his notion. Talked himself silly. A fine clerk he is, and so on, and so on. Let us go, sir, said Marmeladov all at once, raising his head and addressing Raskolnikov. Come along with me. Kozel's house, looking into the yard. I'm going to Katerina Ivanovna. Time I did. Raskolnikov had for some time been wanting to go, and he had meant to help him. Marmeladov was much unsteadier on his legs than in his speech, and leaned heavily on the young man. They had 200 or 300 paces to go. The drunken man was more and more overcome by dismay and confusion as they drew nearer the house. It's not Katerina Ivanovna I am afraid of now, he muttered in agitation, and that she will begin pulling my hair. What does my hair matter? Bother my hair. That's what I say. Indeed, it will be better if she does begin pulling it. That's not what I am afraid of. It's her eyes I'm afraid of. Yes, her eyes. The red on her cheeks, too, frightens me, and her breathing, too. Have you noticed how people in that disease breathe when they are excited? I am frightened of the children's crying, too, for if Sonia has not taken them food, I don't know what's happened. I don't know. But blows I am not afraid of. No, sir, that such blows are not a pain to me, but even an enjoyment. In fact, I can't get on without it. It's better so. Let her strike me. It relieves her heart. It's better so. There is the house of Kozel, the cabinet maker, a German well-to-do. Lead the way. They went in from the yard and up to the 4th story. The staircase got darker and darker as they went up. It was nearly 11 o'clock, and although in summer in Petersburg there is no real night, yet it was quite dark at the top of the stairs. A grimy little door at the very top of the stairs stood ajar. A very poor-looking room about 10 paces long was lighted up by a candle end. The whole of it was visible from the entrance. It was all in disorder, littered up with rags of all sorts, especially children's garments. Across the furthest corner was stretched a ragged sheet. Behind it probably was the bed. There was nothing in the room except 2 chairs and a sofa, covered with American leather, full of holes, before which stood an old deal kitchen table, unpainted and uncovered. At the edge of the table stood a smouldering tallow candle in an iron candlestick. It appeared that the family had a room to themselves, not part of a room, but their room was practically a passage. The door leading to the other rooms, or rather cupboards, into which Amalia Lipivexel's flat was divided, stood half open, and there was shouting, uproar, and laughter within. People seemed to be playing cards and drinking tea there. Words of the most unceremonious kind flew out from time to time. Raskolnikov recognized Katerina Ivanovna at once. She was a rather tall, slim, and graceful woman, terribly emaciated, with magnificent dark brown hair, and with a hectic flush in her cheeks. She was pacing up and down in her little room, pressing her hands against her chest. Her lips were parched, and her breathing came in nervous broken gasps. Her eyes glittered as in fever and looked about with a harsh, immovable stare. And that consumptive and excited face, with the last flickering light of the candle end playing upon it, made a sickening impression. She seemed to Raskolnikov about 30 years old, and was certainly a strange wife for Marmeladov. She had not heard them, and did not notice them coming in. She seemed to be lost in thought, hearing and seeing nothing. The room was close, but she had not opened the window. A stench rose from the staircase, but the door onto the stairs was not closed. From the inner rooms clouds of tobacco smoke floated in. She kept coughing, but did not close the door. The youngest child, a girl of 6, was asleep, sitting curled up on the floor with her head on the sofa. A boy, a year older, stood crying and shaking in the corner. Probably he had just had a beating. Beside him stood a girl of 9 years old, tall and thin, wearing a thin and ragged chemise with an ancient cashmere pelisse flung over her bare shoulders, long outgrown and barely reaching her knees. Her arm, as thin as a stick, was round her brother's neck. She was trying to comfort him, whispering something to him, and doing all she could to keep him from whimpering again. At the same time, her large dark eyes, which looked larger still from the thinness of her frightened face, were watching her mother with alarm. Marmeladov did not enter the door, but dropped on his knees in the very doorway, pushing Raskolnikov in front of him. The woman, seeing a stranger, stopped indifferently facing him, coming to herself for a moment, and apparently wondering what he had come for. But evidently she decided that he was going into the next room, as he had to pass through hers to get there. Taking no further notice of him, she walked towards the outer door, to close it, and uttered a sudden scream on seeing her husband on his knees in the doorway. "Ah!" she cried out in a frenzy. "He has come back, the criminal, the monster. And where is the money? What's in your pocket? Show me. And your clothes are all different. Where are your clothes? Where is the money? Speak." And she fell to searching him. Marmeladov submissively and obediently held up both arms to facilitate the search. Not a farthing was there. "Where is the money?" she cried. "Mercy on us! Can he have drunk it all?" There were 12 silver roubles left in the chest, and in a fury she seized him by the hair and dragged him into the room. Marmeladov seconded her efforts by meekly crawling along on his knees. "And this is a consolation to me. This does not hurt me, but is a positive consolation. Honored sir," he called out, shaken to and fro by his hair, and even once striking the ground with his forehead. The child asleep on the floor woke up and began to cry. The boy in the corner, losing all control, began trembling and screaming, and rushed to his sister in violent terror, almost in a fit. The eldest girl was shaking like a leaf. "He's drunk it! He's drunk it all!" the poor woman screamed in despair. "And his clothes are gone, and they are hungry, hungry!" And wringing her hands, she pointed to the children. "Oh, accursed life! And you, are you not ashamed? She pounced all at once upon Raskolnikov. From the tavern. Have you been drinking with him? You've been drinking with him too. Go away. The young man was hastening away without uttering a word. The inner door was thrown wide open, and inquisitive faces were peering in at it. Coarse laughing faces with pipes and cigarettes and heads wearing caps thrust themselves in at the doorway. Further in could be seen figures in dressing gowns, flung open, in costumes of unseemly scantiness, some of them with cards in their hands. They were particularly diverted when Marmeladov, dragged about by his hair, shouted that it was a consolation to him. They even began to come into the room. At last a sinister, shrill outcry was heard. This came from Amalia Lippivexel, herself pushing her way amongst them, and trying to restore order after her own fashion, and for the 100th time to frighten the poor woman by ordering her, with coarse abuse, to clear out of the room next day. As he went out, Raskolnikov had time to put his hand into his pocket to snatch up the coppers he had received in exchange for his rouble in the tavern, and to lay them unnoticed on the window. Afterwards, on the stairs, he changed his mind, and would have gone back. What a stupid thing I've done, he thought to himself. They have Sonia, and I want it myself. But reflecting that it would be impossible to take it back now, and that in any case he would not have taken it, he dismissed it with a wave of his hand and went back to his lodging. Sonia wants pomatum too, he said as he walked along the street, and he laughed malignantly. Such smartness costs money. And maybe Sonia herself will be bankrupt today, for there is always a risk, hunting big game, digging for gold. Then they would all be without a crust tomorrow, except for my money. Hurrah for Sonia! What a mine they've dug there, and they're making the most of it. Yes, they are making the most of it. They've wept over it, and grown used to it. Man grows used to everything. The scoundrel! He sank into thought. And what if I am wrong? He cried suddenly, after a moment's thought. What if man is not really a scoundrel? Man in general, I mean, the whole race of mankind. Then all the rest is prejudice, simply artificial terrors, and there are no barriers, and it's all as it should be. Chapter 3. He waked up late next day, after a broken sleep, but his sleep had not refreshed him. He waked up bilious, irritable, ill-tempered, and looked with hatred at his room. It was a tiny cupboard of a room about 6 paces in length. It had a poverty-stricken appearance with its dusty yellow paper peeling off the walls, and it was so low-pitched that a man of more than average height was ill at ease in it, and felt every moment that he would knock his head against the ceiling. The furniture was in keeping with the room. There were 3 old chairs, rather rickety, a painted table in the corner on which lay a few manuscripts and books. The dust that lay thick upon them showed that they had been long untouched. A big clumsy sofa occupied almost the whole of one wall and half the floor space of the room. It was once covered with chintz, but was now in rags, and served Raskolnikov as a bed. Often he went to sleep on it, as he was, without undressing, without sheets, wrapped in his old student's overcoat, with his head on one little pillow, under which he heaped up all the linen he had, clean and dirty, by way of a bolster. A little table stood in front of the sofa. It would have been difficult to sink to a lower ebb of disorder, but to Raskolnikov, in his present state of mind, this was positively agreeable. He had got completely away from everyone, like a tortoise in its shell, and even the sight of a servant girl who had to wait upon him and looked sometimes into his room made him writhe with nervous irritation. He was in the condition that overtakes some monomaniacs, entirely concentrated upon one thing. His landlady had for the last fortnight given up sending him in meals, and he had not yet thought of expostulating with her, though he went without his dinner. Nastasia, the cook and only servant, was rather pleased at the lodger's mood, and had entirely given up sweeping and doing his room, Only once a week or so, she would stray into his room with a broom. She waked him up that day. "Get up! Why are you asleep?" she called to him. "It's past 9. I have brought you some tea. Will you have a cup? I should think you're fairly starving." Raskolnikov opened his eyes, started, and recognized Nastasia. "From the landlady, eh?" he asked slowly, and with a sickly face, sitting up on the sofa. From the landlady, indeed. She set before him her own cracked teapot full of weak and stale tea, and laid 2 yellow lumps of sugar by the side of it. "Here, Nastasia, take it please," he said, fumbling in his pocket, for he had slept in his clothes, and taking out a handful of coppers. "Run and buy me a loaf, and get me a little sausage, the cheapest at the pork butcher's. The loaf I'll fetch you this very minute, but wouldn't you rather have some cabbage soup instead of sausage? It's capital soup, yesterday's. I saved it for you yesterday, but you came in late. It's fine soup." When the soup had been brought, and he had begun upon it, Nastasia sat down beside him on the sofa and began chatting. She was a country peasant woman, and a very talkative one. "Praskovya Pavlovna means to complain to the police about you," she said. He scowled. "To the police? What does she want? You don't pay her money, and you won't turn out of the room. That's what she wants, to be sure. The devil, that's the last straw," he muttered, grinding his teeth. "No, that would not suit me just now. She is a fool," he added aloud. "I'll go and talk to her today. Fool she is, and no mistake, just as I am. But why, if you are so clever, do you lie here like a sack, and have nothing to show for it? One time you used to go out, you say, to teach children. But why is it you do nothing now?" "I am doing," Raskolnikov began, sullenly and reluctantly. "What are you doing?" "Work." "What sort of work?" "I am thinking," he answered seriously after a pause. Nastasia was overcome with a fit of laughter. She was given to laughter, and when anything amused her, she laughed inaudibly, quivering and shaking all over till she felt ill. "And have you made much money by your thinking?" she managed to articulate at last. "One can't go out to give lessons without boots, and I'm sick of it. Don't quarrel with your bread and butter. They pay so little for lessons. What's the use of a few coppers?" he answered, reluctantly, as though replying to his own thoughts. "And you want to get a fortune, all once?" He looked at her strangely. "Yes, I want a fortune," he answered firmly, after a brief pause. "Don't be in such a hurry. You quite frighten me. Shall I get you the loaf or not?" "As you please." "Ah, I forgot. A letter came for you yesterday when you were out." "A letter?" "For me. From whom?" "I can't say. I gave 3 kopecks of my own to the postman for it. Will you pay me back?" "Then bring it to me. For God's sake, bring it," cried Raskolnikov, greatly excited. "Good God!" A minute later, the letter was brought him. That was it, from his mother, from the province of R. He turned pale when he took it. It was a long while since he had received a letter, but another feeling also suddenly stabbed his heart. "Nastasia, leave me alone, for goodness' sake. Here are your 3 kopecks, but for goodness' sake, make haste and go." The letter was quivering in his hand. He did not want to open it in her presence. He wanted to be left alone with this letter. When Nastasia had gone out, he lifted it quickly to his lips and kissed it. Then he gazed intently at the address, the small, sloping handwriting, so dear and familiar, of the mother who had once taught him to read and write. He delayed. He seemed almost afraid of something. At last he opened it. It was a thick, heavy letter, weighing over 2 ounces. 2 large sheets of note paper were covered with very small handwriting. "My dear Rodia," wrote his mother, "it's 2 months since I last had a talk with you by letter, which has distressed me, and even kept me awake at night, thinking. But I am sure you will not blame me for my inevitable silence. You know how I love you. You are all we have to look to, Junior and I. You are our all, our one hope, our one stay. What a grief it was to me when I heard that you had given up the university some months ago, for want of means to keep yourself, and that you had lost your lessons and your other work. How could I help you out of my 120 rubles a year pension? The 15 rubles I sent you 4 months ago, I borrowed, as you know, on security of my pension from Vasily Ivanovich Vorushin, a merchant of this town. He is a kind-hearted man, and was a friend of your father's too. But having given him the right to receive the pension, I had to wait till the debt was paid off, and that is only just done, so that I have been unable to send you anything all this time. But now, thank God, I believe I shall be able to send you something more, and in fact we may congratulate ourselves on our good fortune now, of which I hasten to inform you. In the first place, would you have guessed, dear Rodia, that your sister has been living with me for the last 6 weeks, and we shall not be separated in the future? Thank God, her sufferings are over. But I will tell you everything in order, so that you may know just how everything has happened, and all that we have hitherto concealed from you. When you wrote to me 2 months ago that you had heard that Dounia had a great deal to put up with in the Svidrigaïlovs' house, when you wrote that and asked me to tell you all about it, what could I write in answer to you? If I had written the whole truth to you, I dare say you would have thrown up everything and have come to us, even if you had to walk all the way, for I know your character and your feelings, and you would not let your sister be insulted. I was in despair myself, but what could I do? And besides, I did not know the whole truth myself then. What made it all so difficult was that Dounia received 100 rubles in advance when she took the place as governess in their family, on condition of part of her salary being deducted every month, and so it was impossible to throw up the situation without repaying the debt. This sum now, I can explain it all to you, my precious Rodia, she took chiefly in order to send you 60 rubles, which you needed so terribly then, and which you received from us last year. We deceived you then, writing that this money came from Dounia's savings, but that was not so. And now I tell you all about it, because, thank God, things have suddenly changed for the better, and that you may know how Dounia loves you and what a heart she has. At first, indeed, Mr. Svidrigaïlov treated her very rudely, and used to make disrespectful and jeering remarks at table, but I don't want to go into all those painful details, so as not to worry you for nothing when it is now all over. In short, in spite of the kind and generous behaviour of Marfa Petrovna, Mr. Svidrigaïlov's wife, and all the rest of the household, Dounia had a very hard time, especially when Mr. Svidrigaïlov, relapsing into his old regimental habits, was under the influence of Bacchus. And how do you think it was all explained later on? Would you believe that the crazy fellow had conceived a passion for Dounia from the beginning, but had concealed it under a show of rudeness and contempt? Possibly he was ashamed and horrified himself at his own flighty hopes, considering his years and his being the father of a family, and that made him angry with Dounia, and possibly, too, he hoped by his rude and sneering behaviour to hide the truth from others. But at last he lost all control, and had the face to make Dounia an open and shameful proposal, promising her all sorts of inducements and offering, besides to throw up everything and take her to another estate of his, or even abroad. You can imagine all she went through. To leave her situation at once was impossible, not only on account of the money debt, but also to spare the feelings of Marfa Petrovna, whose suspicions would have been aroused, and then Dounia would have been the cause of a rupture in the family, and it would have meant a terrible scandal for Dounia too. That would have been inevitable. There were various other reasons, owing to which Dounia could not hope to escape from that awful house for another 6 weeks. You know Dounia, of course. You know how clever she is, and what a strong will she has. Dounia can endure a great deal, and even in the most difficult cases she has the fortitude to maintain her firmness. She did not even write to me about everything for fear of upsetting me, although we were constantly in communication. It all ended very unexpectedly. Marfa Petrovna accidentally overheard her husband imploring Downia in the garden, and putting quite a wrong interpretation on the position, threw the blame upon her, believing her to be the cause of it all. An awful scene took place between them on the spot in the garden. Marfa Petrovna went so far as to strike Dounia, refused to hear anything, and was shouting at her for a whole hour, and then gave orders that Dounia should be packed off at once to me, in it, a plain peasant's cart, into which they flung all her things, her linen and her clothes, or pell-mell, without folding it up and packing it, and a heavy shower of rain came on too, and Dounia, insulted and put to shame, had to drive with a peasant in an open cart all the 17 versts into town. Only think now, what answer could I have sent to the letter I received from you 2 months ago, and what could I have written? I was in despair. I dared not write to you the truth, because you would have been very unhappy, mortified and indignant, and yet what could you do? You could only perhaps ruin yourself, and besides, Dounia would not allow it, and fill up my letter with trifles when my heart was so full of sorrow. I could not. For a whole month the town was full of gossip about this scandal, and it came to such a pass that Dounia and I dared not even go to church on account of the contemptuous looks, whispers, and even remarks made aloud about us. All our acquaintances avoided us, nobody even bowed to us in the street, and I learnt that some shopmen and clerks were intending to insult us in a shameful way, smearing the gates of our house with pitch, so that the landlord began to tell us we must leave. All this was set going by Marfa Petrovna, who managed to slander Dounia and throw dirt at her in every family. She knows everyone in the neighbourhood, and that month she was continually coming into the town, and as she is rather talkative and fond of gossiping about her family affairs, and particularly of complaining to all and each of her husband, which is not at all right, so in a short time she had spread her story, not only in the town, but over the whole surrounding district. It made me ill, but Dounia bore it better than I did, and if only you could have seen how she endured it all, and tried to comfort me and cheer me up. She is an angel, but, by God's mercy, our sufferings were cut short. Mr. Svidrigailov returned to his senses and repented, and probably feeling sorry for Dounia, he laid before Marfa Petrovna a complete and unmistakable proof of Dounia's innocence, in the form of a letter Dounia had been forced to write and give to him before Marfa Petrovna came upon them in the garden. This letter, which remained in Mr. Svidrigailov's hands after her departure, she had written to refuse personal explanations and secret interviews, for which he was entreating her. In that letter she reproached him with great heat and indignation for the baseness of his behaviour in regard to Marfa Petrovna, reminding him that he was the father and head of a family, and telling him how infamous it was of him to torment and make unhappy a defenceless girl, unhappy enough already. Indeed, dear Rodia, the letter was so nobly and touchingly written that I sobbed when I read it, and to this day I cannot read it without tears. Moreover, the evidence of the servants, too, cleared Dounia's reputation. They had seen and known a great deal more than Mr. Svidrigailov had himself supposed, as indeed is always the case with servants. Marfa Petrovna was completely taken aback, and again crushed as she said herself to us, but she was completely convinced of Dounia's innocence. The very next day, being Sunday, she went straight to the cathedral, knelt down and prayed with tears to Our Lady to give her strength to bear this new trial, and to do her duty. Then she came straight from the cathedral to us, told us the whole story, wept bitterly and fully penitent. She embraced Dounia and besought her to forgive her. The same morning, without any delay, she went round to all the houses in the town and everywhere. Shedding tears, she asserted in the most flattering terms Dounia's innocence and the nobility of her feelings. and her behaviour. What was more, she showed and read to everyone the letter in Dunia's own handwriting to Mr. Svidrigailov, and even allowed them to take copies of it, which I must say I think was superfluous. In this way she was busy for several days in driving about the whole town, because some people had taken offence through precedence having been given to others, and therefore they had to take turns, so that in every house she was expected before she arrived, and everyone knew that on such and such a day Marfa Petrovna would be reading the letter in such and such a place, and people assembled for every reading of it, even many who had heard it several times already, both in their own houses and in other people's. In my opinion, a very great deal of all this was unnecessary, but that's Marfa Petrovna's character. Anyway, she succeeded in completely re-establishing Donia's reputation, and the whole ignominy of this affair rested as an indelible disgrace upon her husband, as the only person to blame, so that I really began to feel sorry for him. It was really began to feel sorry for treating the crazy fellow too harshly. Dunia was at once asked to give lessons in several families, but she refused. All of a sudden, everyone began to treat her with marked respect, and all this did much to bring about the event by which, one may say, our whole fortunes are now transformed. You must know, dear Rodia, that Dunia has a suitor, and that she has already consented to marry him. I hasten to tell you all about the matter, and though it has been arranged without asking your consent, I think you will not be aggrieved with me or with your sister on that account, for you will see that we could not wait and put off our decision till we heard from you, and you could not have judged all the facts without being on the spot. This was how it happened. He is already of the rank of a councillor, Fyodor Petrovitch Luzhin, and is distantly related to Marfa Petrovna, who has been very active in bringing the match about. It began with his expressing through her his desire to make our acquaintance. He was properly received, drank coffee with us, and the very next day he sent us a letter in which he very courteously made an offer and begged for a speedy and decided answer. He is a very busy man and is in a great hurry to get to Petersburg, so that every moment is precious to him. At first, of course, we were greatly surprised, as it had all happened so quickly and unexpectedly. We thought and talked it over the whole day. He is a well-to-do man, to be depended upon. He has 2 posts in the government and has already made his fortune. It is true that he is 45 years old, but he is of a fairly prepossessing appearance, and might still be thought attractive by women, and he is altogether a very respectable and presentable man, only he seems a little morose and somewhat conceited. But possibly that may only be the impression he makes at first sight. And beware, dear Rodia, when he comes to Petersburg, as he shortly will do, beware of judging him too hastily and severely, as your way is, if there is anything you do not like in him at first sight. I give you this warning, although I feel sure that he will make a favourable impression upon you. Moreover, in order to understand any man, one must be deliberate and careful, to avoid forming prejudices and mistaken ideas, which are very difficult to correct and get over afterward. And Fyodor Petrovitch, judging by many indications, is a thoroughly estimable man. At his first visit, indeed, he told us that he was a practical man, but still he shares, as he expressed it, many of the convictions of our most rising generation, and he is an opponent of all prejudices. He said a good deal more, for he seems a little conceited and likes to be listened to, but this is scarcely a vice. I of course understood very little of it, but Dunia explained to me that, though he is not a man of great education, he is clever and seems to be good-natured. You know your sister's character, Rodia. She is a resolute, sensible, patient, and generous girl, but she has a passionate heart, as I know very well. Of course, there is no great love, either on his side or on hers. But Dunia is a clever girl, and has the heart of an angel, and will make it her duty to make her husband happy, who on his side will make her happiness his care. Of that We have no good reason to doubt, though it must be admitted the matter has been arranged in great haste. Besides, he is a man of great prudence, and he will see, to be sure of himself, that his own happiness will be the more secure, the happier Downia is with him. And as for some defects of character, for some habits, and even certain differences of opinion, which indeed are inevitable even in the happiest marriages, Dunia has said that as regards all that, she relies on herself, that there is nothing to be uneasy about, and that she is ready to put up with a great deal, if only their future relationship can be an honourable and straightforward one. He struck me, for instance, at first, as rather abrupt, but that may well come from his being an outspoken man, and that is no doubt how it is. For instance, at his second visit, after he had received Dunia's consent, in the course of conversation, he declared that before making Dunia's acquaintance, he had made up his mind to marry a girl of good reputation, without dowry, and above all, one who had experienced poverty, because, as he explained, a man ought not to be indebted to his wife, but that it is better for a wife to look upon her husband as her benefactor. I must add that he expressed it more nicely and politely than I have done, for I have forgotten his actual phrases and only remember the meaning. And besides, it was obviously not said of design, but slipped out in the heat of conversation, so that he tried afterwards to correct himself and smooth it over, but all the same it did strike me as somewhat rude, and I said so afterwards to Dania. But Downia was vexed, and answered that words are not deeds, and that, of course, is perfectly true. Dunia did not sleep all night before she made up her mind, and thinking that I was asleep, she got out of bed and was walking up and down the room all night. At last she knelt down before the icon and prayed long and fervently, and in the morning she told me that she had decided. I have mentioned already that Pyotr Petrovitch is just setting off for Petersburg, where he has a great deal of business, and he wants to open a legal bureau. He has been occupied for many years in conducting civil and commercial litigation, and only the other day he won an important case. He has to be in Petersburg because he has an important case before the Senate. So, Rodia dear, he may be of the greatest use to you, in every way indeed. And Downia and I have agreed that from this very day you could definitely enter upon your career, and might consider that your future is marked out and assured for you. Oh, if only this comes to pass, this would be such a benefit that we could only look upon it as a providential blessing. Dunia is dreaming of nothing else. We have even ventured already to drop a few words on the subject to Pyotr Petrovitch. He was cautious in his answer, and said that of course, as he could not get on without a secretary, it would be better to be paying a salary to a relation than to a stranger, if only the former were fitted for the duties, as though there could be doubt of your being fitted. But then he expressed doubts whether your studies at the university would leave you time for work at his office. The matter dropped for the time, but Downia is thinking of nothing else now. She has been in a sort of fever for the last few days, and has already made a regular plan for your becoming, in the end, an associate and even a partner in Pyotr Petrovitch's business, which might well be, seeing that you are a student of law. I am in complete agreement with her, Rodia, and share all her plans and hopes, and think there is every probability of realizing them. And in spite of Pyotr Petrovitch's evasiveness, very natural at present, since he does not know you, Dunia is firmly persuaded that she will gain everything by her good influence over her future husband. This she is reckoning upon. Of course, we are careful not to talk of any of these more remote plans to Pyotr Petrovitch, especially of your becoming his partner. He is a practical man, and might take this very coldly. It might all seem to him simply a daydream, nor has either Downia or I breathed a word to him of the great hopes we have of his helping us to pay for your university studies. We have not spoken of it in the first place, because it will come to pass of itself later on. Without wasting words, offered to do it of himself, as though he could refuse Dunia. that the more readily, since you may, by your own efforts, become his right hand in the office, and receive this assistance not as a charity, but as a salary earned by your own work. Dunia wants to arrange it all like this, and I quite agree with her. And we have not spoken of our plans for another reason. That is, because I particularly wanted you to feel on an equal footing when you first meet him. When Dunia spoke to him with enthusiasm about you, he answered that one could never judge of a man without seeing him close, for oneself, and that he looked forward to forming his own opinion when he makes your acquaintance. Do you know, my precious Rodia, I think that perhaps for some reasons nothing to do with Pyotr Petrovitch, though simply for my own personal, perhaps old womanish, fancies I should do better to go on living by myself, apart, than with them, after the wedding. I am convinced that he will be generous and delicate enough to invite me, and to urge me to remain with my daughter for the future. And if he has said nothing about it hitherto, it is simply because it has been taken for granted. But I shall refuse. I have noticed more than once in my life that husbands don't quite get on with their mothers-in-law, and I don't want to be the least bit in anyone's way, and for my own sake, too, would rather be quite independent, so long as I have a crust of bread of my own, and such children as you and Downia. If possible, I would settle somewhere near you, for the most joyful piece of news, dear Rodia, I have kept for the end of my letter. Know then, my dear boy, that we may, perhaps, be all together in a very short time, and may embrace one another again. After a separation of almost 3 years, it is settled for certain that Donia and I are to set off for Petersburg. Exactly when I don't know, but very, very soon, possibly in a week. It all depends on Pyotr Petrovitch, who will let us know when he has had time to look round him in Petersburg. To suit his own arrangements, he is anxious to have the ceremony as soon as possible, even before the fast of Our Lady, if it could be managed, or if that is too soon, to be ready immediately after. Oh, with what happiness I shall press you to my heart. Dunia is all excitement at the joyful thought of seeing you. She said one day, in joke, that she would be ready to marry Pyotr Petrovitch for that alone. She is an angel. She is not writing anything to you now, and has only told me to write that she has so much to tell you that she is not going to take up her pen now, for a few lines would tell you nothing, and it would only mean upsetting herself. She bids me send you her love and innumerable kisses. But, although we shall be meeting so soon, perhaps I shall send you as much money as I can in a day or two. Now that everyone has heard that Downia is to marry Pyotr Petrovitch, my credit has suddenly improved, and I know that Afanasy Ivanovitch will trust me now, even to 75 roubles on the security of my pension, so that perhaps I shall be able to send you 25 or even 30 roubles. I would send you more, but I am uneasy about our travelling expenses, for though Pyotr Petrovitch has been so kind as to undertake part of the expenses of the journey, that is to say, he has taken upon himself the conveyance of our bags and big trunk, which will be conveyed through some acquaintances of his, we must reckon upon some expense on our arrival in Petersburg, where we can't be left without a halfpenny, at least for the first few days. But we have calculated it all, Dunia and I, to the last penny, and we see that the journey will not cost very much. It is only 90 versts from us to the railway, and we have come to an agreement with a driver we know, so as to be in readiness, and from there Downia and I can travel quite comfortably 3rd class, so that I may very likely be able to send to you, not 25, but 30 roubles. But enough, I have covered 2 sheets already, and there is no space left for more. Our whole history, but so many events have happened, and now, my precious Rodia, I embrace you and send you a mother's blessing till we meet. Love Downia, your sister, Rodia. Love her as she loves you, and understand that she loves you beyond everything, more than herself. She is an angel, and you, Rodia, you are everything to us, our one hope, our one consolation. If only you are happy, We shall be happy. Do you still say your prayers, Rodia, and believe in the mercy of our Creator and our Redeemer? I am afraid in my heart that you may have been visited by the new spirit of infidelity that is abroad today. If it is so, I pray for you. Remember, dear boy, how in your childhood, when your father was living, you used to lisp your prayers at my knee, and how happy we all were in those days. Goodbye till we meet then. I embrace you warmly, warmly, with many kisses. Yours till death, Rodion Raskolnikov. Almost from the first, while he read the letter, Raskolnikov's face was wet with tears, but when he finished it, his face was pale and distorted, and a bitter, wrathful, and malignant smile was on his lips. He laid his head down on his threadbare, dirty pillow and pondered a long time. His heart was beating violently, and his brain was in a turmoil. At last he felt cramped and stifled in the little yellow room that was like a cupboard or a box. His eyes and his mind craved for space. He took up his hat and went out, this time without dread of meeting anyone. He had forgotten his dread. He turned in the direction of the Vasilyevsky Ostrov, walking along Vasilyevsky Prospect as though hastening on some business. But he walked, as his habit was, without noticing his way, muttering, and even speaking aloud to himself, to the astonishment of the passers-by. Many of them took him to be drunk. Chapter 4. His mother's letter had been a torture to him, but as regards the chief fact in it, he had felt not one moment's hesitation, even whilst he was reading the letter. The essential question was settled, and irrevocably settled in his mind. Never such a marriage while I am alive, and Mr. J. Lushin be damned. The thing is perfectly clear, he muttered to himself, with a malignant smile, anticipating the triumph of his decision. No, mother, no, Dunya, you won't deceive me. And then they apologize for not asking my advice and for taking the decision without me. I dare say they imagine it is arranged now and can't be broken off. But we will see whether it can or not. A magnificent excuse. Pyotr Petrovitch is such a busy man that even his wedding has to be in post-haste, almost by express. No, Dunya, I see it all, and I know what you want to say to me, and I know too what you were thinking about when you walked up and down all night, and what your prayers were like before the Holy Mother of Kazan, who stands in Mother's bedroom. Bitter is the ascent to Golgotha. So it is finally settled. You have determined to marry a sensible businessman, Avdotia Romanovna, one who has a fortune, has already made his fortune. That is so much more solid and impressive. A man who holds 2 government posts and who shares the ideas of our most rising generation, as Mother writes, and who seems to be kind, as Dounia herself observed. That seems beats everything, and that very Dounia, for that very seems, is marrying him. Splendid, splendid, but I should like to know why Mother has written to me about our most rising generation, simply as a descriptive touch, or with the idea of prepossessing me in favour of Mr. Luzhin. Oh, the cunning of them! I should like to know one thing more, how far they were open with one another that day and night, and all this time since. Was it all put into words, or did both understand that they had the same thing at heart and in their minds, so that there was no need to speak of it aloud, and better not to speak of it? Most likely it was partly like that. From Mother's letter, it's evident he struck her as rude a little, and Mother in her simplicity took her observations to Dounia, and she was sure to be vexed, and answered her angrily, I should think so. Who would not be angered when it was quite clear, without any naive questions, and when it was understood that it was useless to discuss it? And why does she write to me, love Dounia, Rodia, and she loves you more than herself? Has she a secret conscience prick at sacrificing her daughter to her son? You are our one comfort, you are everything to us. Oh, Mother! His bitterness grew more and more intense, and if he had happened to meet Mr. Luzhin at the moment, he might have murdered him. Yes, that's true, he continued, pursuing the whirling ideas that chased each other in his brain. It is true that it needs time and care to get to know a man. But there is no mistake about Mr. Logis. The chief thing is, he is a man of business and seems kind. That was something, wasn't it, to send the bags and big box for them? A kind man, no doubt after that, but his bride and her mother are to drive in a peasant's cart covered with sacking. I know I have been driven in it. No matter. It is only 90 versts, and then they can travel very comfortably, third class, for 1,000 versts. Quite right, too. One must cut one's coat, according to one's cloth. But what about you, Mr. Luzhin? She is your bride, and you must be aware that her mother has to raise money on her pension for the journey. To be sure, it's a matter of business, a partnership for mutual benefit, with equal shares and expenses, food and drink provided, but pay for your tobacco. The businessman has got the better of them too. The luggage will cost less than their fares, and very likely go for nothing. How is it that they don't both see all that, or is it that they don't want to see, and they are pleased? Pleased? And to think that this is only the first blossoming, and that the real fruits are to come. But what really matters is not the stinginess, is not the meanness, but the tone of the whole thing. For that will be the tone after marriage. It's a foretaste of it. And mother too. Why should she be so lavish? What will she have by the time she gets to Petersburg? 3 silver roubles or 2. Paper ones, as she says. That old woman? What does she expect to live upon in Petersburg afterwards? She has her reasons already for guessing that she could not live with Dunya after the marriage, even for the first few months. The good man has no doubt let slip something on that subject also, though mother would deny it. I shall refuse, says she. On whom is she reckoning then? Is she counting on what is left of her 120 roubles of pension when Afanassy Ivanovitch's debt is paid? She knits woolen shawls and embroiders cuffs, ruining her old eyes, and all her shawls don't add more than 20 roubles a year to her 120. I know that. So she is building all her hopes, all the time, on Mr. Luzin's generosity. He will offer it of himself. He will press it on me. You may wait a long time for that. That's how it always is with these Schilleresque noble hearts. Till the last moment, every goose is a swan with them. Till the last moment, they hope for the best, and will see nothing wrong. And although they have an inkling of the other side of the other side of the air picture, yet they won't face the truth till they are forced to. The very thought of it makes them shiver. They thrust the truth away with both hands, until the man they deck out in false colours puts a fool's cap on them with his own hands. I should like to know whether Mr. Luzhin has any orders of merit. I bet he has the Anna in his buttonhole, and that he puts it on when he goes to dine with contractors or merchants. He will be sure to have it for his wedding too. Enough of him. Confound him. Mother I don't wonder at. It's like her. God bless her. But how could Dunya, darling, as though I did not know you. You were nearly 20 when I saw you last. I understood you then. Mother writes that Dunya can put up with a great deal. I know that very well. I knew that 2 years and a half ago, and for the last 2.5 years I had been thinking about it, thinking of just that the Dunya can put up with a great deal. If she could put up with Mr. Svidrigailov and all the rest of it, she certainly can put up with a great deal. And now mother and she have taken it into their heads that she can put up with Mr. Luzhin, who propounds the theory of the superiority of wives raised from destitution and owing everything to their husband's bounty, who propounds it too almost at the first interview. Granted that he let it slip, though he is a sensible man. Yet maybe it was not a slip at all, but he meant to make himself clear as soon as possible. But Dunya, she understands the man, of course, but she will have to live with the man. Why? She'd live on black bread and water. She would not sell her soul. She would not barter her moral freedom for comfort. She would not barter it for all Schleswig-Holstein, much less Mr. Lugin's money. No, Junia is not that sort when I knew her, and she is still the same, of course. Yes, there's no denying. The Svidrigaïlovs are a bitter pill. It's a bitter thing to spend one's life, a governess in the provinces, for 200 roubles. But I know she would rather be a nigger on a plantation, or a let with a German master, than degrade her soul and her moral dignity by binding herself or ever to a man whom she does not respect, and with whom she has nothing in common, for her own advantage. And if Mr. Luzhin had been of unalloyed gold, or one huge diamond, she would never have consented to become his legal concubine. Why is she consenting then? What's the point of it? What's the answer? It's clear enough. For herself, for her comfort, to save her life she would not sell herself, but for someone else she is doing it. For one she loves, for one she adores, she will sell herself. That's what it all amounts to. For her brother, for her mother, she will sell herself. She will sell everything. In such cases, we overcome our moral feeling if necessary. Freedom, peace, conscience even, all are brought into the market. Let my life go. If only my dear ones may be happy. More than that, we become casuists. We learn to be Jesuitical, and for a time, maybe we can soothe ourselves. We can persuade ourselves that it is one's duty for a good object. That's just like us. It's as clear as daylight. It's clear that Rodion Raskolnikov is the central figure in the business, and no one else. Oh yes, she can ensure his happiness, keep him in the university, make him a partner in the office, make his whole future secure. Perhaps he may even be a rich man later on, prosperous, respected, and may even end his life a famous man. But my mother, it's all Rodia, precious Rodia, her firstborn, for such a son who would not sacrifice such a daughter. O loving, over-partial hearts, why, for his sake we would not shrink even from Sonia's fate. Sonia Marmeladov, the eternal victim so long as the world lasts. Have you taken the measure of your sacrifice, both of you? Is it right? Can you bear it? Is it any use? Is there sense in it? And let me tell you, Dunia, Sonia's life is no worse than life with Mr. V. Luzhin. There can be no question of love, mother writes. And what if there can be no respect either? If on the contrary there is aversion, contempt, repulsion, what then? So you will have to keep up your appearance too. Is not that so? Do you understand what that smartness means? Do you understand that the Luzhin smartness is just the same thing as Sonia's, and maybe worse, while baser, because in your case, Dania, it's a bargain for luxuries after all. But with Sonia it's simply a question of starvation. It has to be paid for. It has to be paid for, Donia, this smartness. And what if it's more than you can bear afterwards, if you regret it? The bitterness, the misery, the curses, the tears hidden from all the world. For you are not a Marfa Petrovna. And how will your mother feel then? Even now she is uneasy, she is worried, but then when she sees it all clearly, and I, yes, indeed, what have you taken me for? I won't have your sacrifice, Dunia. I won't have it, mother. It shall not be. So long as I am alive, it shall not. It shall not. I won't accept it. He suddenly paused in his reflection and stood still. It shall not be. But what are you going to do to prevent it? You will forbid it. And what right have you? What can you promise them on your side to give you such a right? Your whole life, your whole future, you will devote to them when you have finished your studies and obtained a post. Yes, we have heard all that before, and that's all words. But now something must be done. Now do you understand that? And what are you doing now? You are living upon them. They borrow on their 100 roubles pension. They borrow from the Svidrigayilovs. How are you going to save them from Svidrigayilovs? From Afanasy Ivanovich Varushin, or future millionaire Zeus, who would arrange their lives for them? In another 10 years, Mother will be blind with knitting shawls, maybe with weeping too. She will be worn to a shadow with fasting. And my sister? Imagine for a moment what may have become of your sister in 10 years. What may happen to her during those 10 years? Can you fancy? So he tortured himself, fretting himself with such questions, and finding a kind of enjoyment in it. And yet, all these questions were not new ones suddenly confronting him. They were old familiar aches. It was long since they had first begun to grip and rend his heart. Long, long ago, his present anguish had its first beginnings. It had waxed and gathered strength. It had matured and concentrated until it had taken the form of a fearful, frenzied, and fantastic question, which tortured his heart and mind, clamoring insistently for an answer. Now his mother's letter had burst on him like a thunderclap. It was clear that he must not now suffer passively, worrying himself over unsolved questions, but that he must do something, do it at once, and do it quickly. Anyway, he must decide on something or else, or throw up life altogether, he cried suddenly in a frenzy. Accept one's lot humbly as it is, once for all, and stifle everything in oneself, giving up all claim to activity, life, and love. Do you understand, sir? Do you understand what it means when you have absolutely nowhere to turn? Marmeladov's question came suddenly into his mind, for every man must have somewhere to turn. He gave a sudden start. Another thought that he had had yesterday slipped back into his mind, but he did not start at the thought recurring to him, for he knew, he had felt beforehand, that it must come back. He was expecting it. Besides, it was not only yesterday's thought. The difference was that a month ago, yesterday even, the thought was a mere dream. But now it appeared not a dream at all. It had taken a new menacing and quite unfamiliar shape, and he suddenly became aware of this himself. He felt a hammering in his head, and there was a darkness before his eyes. He looked round hurriedly. He was searching for something. He wanted to sit down and was looking for a seat. He was walking along the quay. Boulevard. There was a seat about 100 paces in front of him. He walked towards it as fast he could, but on the way he met with a little adventure which absorbed all his attention. Looking for the seat, he had noticed a woman walking some 20 paces in front of him, but at first he took no more notice of her than of other objects that crossed his path. It had happened to him many times, going home, not to notice the road by which he was going, and he was accustomed to walk like that. But there was at first sight something so strange about the woman in front of him that gradually his attention was riveted upon her, at first reluctantly and, as it were, resentfully, and then more and more intently. He felt a sudden desire to find out what it was that was so strange about the woman. In the first place, she appeared to be a girl quite young, and she was walking in the great heat bareheaded and with no parasol or gloves, waving her arms about in an absurd way. She had on a dress of some light silky material, but put on strangely awry, not properly hooked up, and torn open at the top of the skirt, close to the waist. A great piece was rent and hanging loose. A little kerchief was flung about her bare throat, but lay slanting on one side. The girl was walking unsteadily, too, stumbling and staggering from side to side. She drew Raskolnikov's whole attention at last. He overtook the girl at the seat, but, on reaching it, she dropped down on it, in the corner. She let her head sink on the back of the seat, and closed her eyes, apparently in extreme exhaustion. Looking at her closely, he saw at once that she was completely drunk. It was a strange and shocking sight. He could hardly believe that he was not mistaken. He saw before him the face of a quite young, fair-haired girl, 16, perhaps not more than 15 years old, pretty little face, but flushed and heavy-looking, and as it were, swollen. The girl seemed hardly to know what she was doing. She crossed one leg over the other, lifting it indecorously, and showed every sign of being unconscious that she was in the street. Raskolnikov did not sit down, but he felt unwilling to leave her, and stood facing her in perplexity. This boulevard was never much frequented, and now, at 2 o'clock, in the stifling heat, it was quite deserted. And yet, on the further side of the boulevard, about 15 paces away, a gentleman was standing on the edge of the pavement. He too would apparently have liked to approach the girl with some object of his own. He too had probably seen her in the distance, and had followed her, but found Raskolnikov in his way. He looked angrily at him, though he tried to escape his notice, and stood impatiently biding his time till the unwelcome man in rags should have moved away. His intentions were unmistakable. The gentleman was a plump, thickly set man, about 30, fashionably dressed, with a high colour, red lips and moustaches. Raskolnikov felt furious. He had a sudden longing to insult this fat dandy in some way. He left the girl for a moment and walked towards the gentleman. "Hey, you Svidrigailov, what do you want here?" he shouted, clenching his fists and laughing, spluttering with rage. "What do you mean?" the gentleman asked sternly, scowling in haughty astonishment. "Get away, that's what I mean. How dare you, you low fellow?" He raised his cane. Raskolnikov rushed at him with his fists, without reflecting that the stout gentleman was a match for two men like himself. But at that instant someone seized him from behind, and a police constable stood between them. "That's enough, gentlemen. No fighting, please, in a public place." "What do you want? Who are you?" he asked Raskolnikov sternly. Noticing his rags, Raskolnikov looked at him intently. He had a straightforward, sensible, soldierly face, with grey moustaches and whiskers. "You are just the man I want," Raskolnikov cried, catching at his arm. "I'm a student, Raskolnikov. You may as well know that too," he added, addressing the gentleman. "Come along, I have something to show you." And taking the policeman by the hand, he drew him towards the seat. "Look here, hopelessly drunk, and she has just come down the boulevard. There is no telling who and what she is. She does not look like a professional. It's more likely she has been given drink and deceived somewhere for the first time, you understand, and they've put her out into the street like that. Look at the way her dress is torn, and the way it has been put on. She has been dressed by somebody. She has not dressed herself, and dressed by unpracticed hands, by a man's hands. That's evident. And now look there. I don't know that dandy with whom I was going to fight. I see him for the first time. But he too has seen her on the road, just now, drunk, not knowing what she is doing, and now he is very eager to get hold of her, to get her away somewhere while she is in this state. That's certain. Believe me, I am not wrong. I saw him myself watching her and following her. But I prevented him, and he is just waiting for me to go away. Now he has walked away a little, and is standing still, pretending to make a cigarette. Think, how can we keep her out of his hands? And how are we to get her home? The policeman saw it all in a flash. The stout gentleman was easy to understand. He turned to consider the girl. The policeman bent over to examine her more closely, and his face worked with genuine compassion. "Ah, what a pity," he said, shaking his head. "Why, she is quite a child. She has been deceived, you can see that at once. Listen, lady," he began, addressing her. "Where do you live?" The girl opened her weary and sleepy-looking eyes, gazed blankly at the speaker, and waved her hand. "Here," said Raskolnikov, feeling in his pocket and finding 20 kopecks. "Here, call a cab and tell him to drive her to her address. The only thing is to find out her address. Missy, the policeman began again, taking the money. "I'll fetch you a cab and take you home myself." "Where shall I take you, eh? Where do you live?" "Go away. They won't let me alone," the girl muttered, and once more waved her hand. Ah, how shocking. It's shameful, missy. It's a shame. He shook his head again, shocked, sympathetic and indignant. It's a difficult job, the policeman said to Raskolnikov, and as he did so, he looked him up and down in a rapid glance. He, too, must have seemed a strange figure to him, dressed in rags and handing him money. Did you meet her far from here? He asked him. I tell you, she was walking in front of me, staggering, just here, in the boulevard. She only just reached the seat and sank down on it. Ah, the shameful things that are done in the world nowadays. God have mercy on us. An innocent creature like that, drunk already. She has been deceived, that's a sure thing. See how her dress has been torn too. Ah, the vice one sees nowadays. And as likely as not she belongs to gentlefolk too. Poor ones maybe. There are many like that nowadays. She looks refined too, as though she were a lady, and he bent over her once more. Perhaps he had daughters growing up like that, looking like ladies and refined, with pretensions to gentility and smartness. The chief thing is, Raskolnikov persisted, to keep her out of this scoundrel's hands. Why should he outrage her? It's as clear as day what he is after. Ah, the brute, he is not moving off. Raskolnikov spoke aloud and pointed to him. The gentleman heard him and seemed about to fly into a rage again, but thought better of it and confined himself to a contemptuous look. He then walked slowly, another 10 paces away, and again halted. Keep her out of his hands we can, said the constable thoughtfully, if only she'd tell us where to take her. But as it is, missy, hey, missy. He bent over her once more. She opened her eyes fully all of a sudden, looked at him intently, as though realizing something, got up from the seat and walked away in the direction from which she had come. Oh, shameful wretches, they won't let me alone, she said, waving her hand again. She walked quickly, though staggering as before. The dandy followed her, but along another avenue, keeping his eye on her. Don't be anxious, I won't let him have her, the policeman said resolutely, and he set off after them. Ah, the vice one sees nowadays, he repeated aloud, sighing. At that moment, something seemed to sting Raskolnikov. In an instant, a complete revulsion of feeling came over him. Hey, here, he shouted after the policeman. The latter turned round. Let them be. What is it to do with you? Let her go. Let him amuse himself. He pointed at the dandy. What is it to do with you? The policeman was bewildered and stared at him open-eyed. Raskolnikov laughed. Well, ejaculated the policeman, with a gesture of contempt, and he walked after the dandy and the girl, probably taking Raskolnikov for a madman or something even worse. He has carried off my 20 kopecks, Raskolnikov murmured angrily when he was left alone. Well, let him take as much from the other fellow to allow him to have the girl, and so let it end. And why did I want to interfere? Is it for me to help? Have I any right to help? Let them devour each other alive. What is it to me? How did I dare to give him 20 kopecks? Were they mine? In spite of those strange words, he felt very wretched. He sat down on the deserted seat. His thoughts strayed aimlessly. He found it hard to fix his mind on anything at that moment. He longed to forget himself altogether, to forget everything, and then to wake up and begin life anew. Poor girl, he said, looking at the empty corner where she had sat. She will come to herself and weep, and then her mother will find out. She will give her a beating, a horrible, shameful beating, and then maybe turn her out of doors. And even if she does not, the Darya Francevnas will get wind of it, and the girl will soon be slipping out on the sly here and there. Then there will be the hospital directly. That's always the luck of those girls with respectable mothers who go wrong on the sly, and then again the hospital. Drink, the taverns, and more hospital in 2 or 3 years, a wreck, and her life over at 18 or 19. Have not I seen cases like that? And how have they been brought to it? Why, they've all come to it like that. Ah, but what does it matter? That's as it should be, they tell us. A certain percentage, they tell us, must every year go that way, to the devil, I suppose, so that the rest may remain chaste and not be interfered with. A percentage! What splendid words they have! They are so scientific, so consolatory. Once you've said, percentage, there's nothing more to worry about. If we had any other word, maybe we might feel more uneasy. But what if Downia were one of the percentage of another one? If not that one? But where am I going? He thought suddenly. Strange. I came out for something. As soon as I had read the letter, I came out. I was going to Vasilyevsky Ostrov, to Razumihin. That's what it was. Now I remember. What for, though? And what put the idea of going to Razumihin into my head just now? That's curious. He wondered at himself. Razumihin was one of his old comrades at the university. It was remarkable that Raskolnikov had hardly any friends at the university. He kept aloof from everyone, went to see no one, and did not welcome anyone who came to see him, and indeed everyone soon gave him up. He took no part in the students' gatherings, amusements, or conversations. He worked with great intensity without sparing himself, and he was respected for this, but no one liked him. He was very poor, and there was a sort of haughty pride and reserve about him, as though he were keeping something to himself. He seemed to some of his comrades to look down upon them all as children, as though he were superior in development, knowledge and convictions, as though their beliefs and interests were beneath him. With Razumihin he had got on, or, at least, he was more unreserved and communicative with him. Indeed, it was impossible to be on any other terms with Razumihin. He was an exceptionally good-humoured and candid youth, good-natured to the point of simplicity, though both depth and dignity lay concealed under that simplicity. The better of his comrades understood this, and all were fond of him. He was extremely intelligent, though he was certainly rather a simpleton at times. He was of striking appearance, tall, thin, black-haired, and always badly shaved. He was sometimes uproarious, and was reputed to be of great physical strength. One night, when out in a festive company, he had with one blow laid a gigantic policeman on his back. There was no limit to his drinking powers, but he could abstain from drink altogether. He sometimes went too far in his pranks, but he could do without pranks altogether. Another thing striking about Razumihin, no failure distressed him, and it seemed as though no unfavourable circumstances could crush him. He could lodge anywhere, and bear the extremes of cold and hunger. He was very poor, and kept himself entirely on what he could earn, by work of one sort or another. He knew of no end of resources by which to earn money. He spent one whole winter without lighting his stove, and used to declare that he liked it better, because one slept more soundly in the cold. For the present he, too, had been obliged to give up the university, but it was only for a time, and he was working with all his might to save enough to return to his studies again. Raskolnikov had not been to see him for the last 4 months, and Razumihin did not even know his address. About 2 months before, they had met in the street, but Raskolnikov had turned away, and even crossed to the other side, that he might not be observed, and though Razumihin noticed him, he passed him by, as he did not want to annoy him. Chapter 5. Of course, I have been meaning lately to go to Razumihin's to ask for work, to ask him to get me lessons or something, Raskolnikov thought. But what help can he be to me now? Suppose he gets me lessons? Suppose he shares his last farthing with me, if he has any farthings, so that I could get some boots, and make myself tidy enough to give lessons. Well, and what then? What shall I do with the few coppers I earn? That's not what I want now. It's really absurd for me to go to Razumihin. The question why he was now going to Razumihin agitated him even more than he was himself aware. He kept uneasily seeking for some sinister significance in this apparently ordinary action. Could I have expected to set it all straight, and to find a way out by means of Razumihin alone? He asked himself in perplexity. He pondered and rubbed his forehead, and strange to say, after long musing, suddenly as if it were spontaneously, and by chance, a fantastic thought came into his head. Teresa Mihins, he said all at once calmly, as though he had reached a final determination. I shall go to Mihins, of course, but not now. I shall go to him on the next day after it, when it will be over and everything will begin afresh. And suddenly he realized what he was thinking. After it, he shouted, jumping up from the seat. But is it really going to happen? Is it possible it really will happen? He left the seat and went off almost at a run. He meant to turn back homewards, but the thought of going home suddenly filled him with intense loathing. In that hole, in that awful little cupboard of his, all this had for a month past been growing up in him, and he walked on at random. His nervous shudder had passed into a fever that made him feel shivering. In spite of the heat, he felt cold. With a kind of effort, he began almost unconsciously, from some inner craving, to stare at all the objects before him, as though looking for something to distract his attention. But he did not succeed, and kept dropping every moment into brooding. When, with a start, he lifted his head again and looked round, he forgot at once what he had just been thinking about, and even where he was going. In this way he walked right across Vassilievsky Ostrov, came out onto the Lesser Neva, crossed the bridge and turned towards the islands. The greenness and freshness were at first restful to his weary eyes after the dust of the town and the huge houses that hemmed him in and weighed upon him. Here there were no taverns, no stifling closeness, no stench. But soon these new pleasant sensations passed into morbid irritability. Sometimes he stood still before a brightly painted summer villa, standing among green foliage. He gazed through the fence. He saw in the distance smartly dressed women on the verandas and balconies, and children running in the garden. The flowers especially caught his attention. He gazed at them longer than at anything. He was met, too, by luxurious carriages and by men and women on horseback. He watched them with curious eyes and forgot about them before they had vanished from his sight. Once he stood still and counted his money. He found he had 30 kopecks, 20 to the policeman, 3 to Nastasia for the letter, so I must have given 47 or 50 to the Marmeladovs yesterday, he thought, reckoning it up for some unknown reason. But he soon forgot with what object he had taken the money out of his pocket. He recalled it on passing an eating-house or tavern, and felt that he was hungry. Going into the tavern, he drank a glass of vodka and ate a pie of some sort. He finished eating it as he walked away. It was a long while since he had taken vodka, and it had an effect upon him at once, though he only drank a wine-glassful. His legs felt suddenly heavy, and a great drowsiness came upon him. He turned homewards, but reaching Petrovsky Ostrov, he stopped completely exhausted, turned off the road into the bushes, sank down upon the grass, and instantly fell asleep. In a morbid condition of the brain, dreams often have a singular actuality, vividness, and extraordinary semblance of reality. At times monstrous images are created, but the setting and the whole picture are so truth-like, and filled with details so delicate, so unexpectedly, but so artistically consistent, that the dreamer, were he an artist like Pushkin, or Turgenev even, could never have invented them in the waking state. Such sick dreams always remain long in the memory, and make a powerful impression on the overwrought and deranged nervous system. Raskolnikov had a fearful dream. He dreamt he was back in his childhood, in the little town of his birth. He was a child about 7 years old, walking into the country with his father on the evening of a holiday. It was a grey and heavy day. The country was exactly as he remembered it. Indeed, he recalled it far more vividly in his dream than he had done in memory. The little town stood on a level flat, as bare as the hand, not even a willow near it. Only in the far distance a copse lay, a dark blur on the very edge of the horizon. A few paces beyond the last market garden stood a tavern, a big tavern which had always aroused in him a feeling of aversion, even of fear, when he walked by it with his father. There was always a crowd there, always shouting, laughter and abuse, hideous hoarse singing, and often fighting. Drunken and horrible-looking figures were hanging about the tavern. He used to cling close to his father, trembling all over when he met them. Near the tavern, the road became a dusty track, the dust of which was always black. It was a winding road, and about 100 paces further on, it turned to the right to the graveyard. In the middle of the graveyard stood a stone church with a green cupola, where he used to go to Mass 2 or 3 times a year with his father and mother, when a service was held in memory of his grandmother, who had long been dead and whom he had never seen. On these occasions they used to take on a white dish tied up in a table napkin, a special sort of rice pudding with raisins stuck in it in the shape of a cross. He loved that church, the old-fashioned, unadorned icons, and the old priest with the shaking head. Near his grandmother's grave, which was marked by a stone, was the little grave of his younger brother, who had died at 6 months old. He did not remember him at all, but he had been told about his little brother, and whenever he visited the graveyard, he used religiously and reverently to cross himself and to bow down and kiss the little grave. And now he dreamt that he was walking with his father past the tavern on the way to the graveyard. He was holding his father's hand and looking with dread at the tavern. A peculiar circumstance attracted his attention. There seemed to be some kind of festivity going on. There were crowds of gaily dressed townspeople, peasant women, their husbands, and riff-raff of all sorts, all singing, and all more or less drunk. Near the entrance of the tavern stood a cart, but a strange cart. It was one of those big carts usually drawn by heavy cart horses, and laden with casks of wine or other heavy goods. He always liked looking at those great cart horses, with their long manes, thick legs, and slow even pace, drawing along a perfect mountain with no appearance of effort, as though it were easier going with a load than without it. But now, strange to say, in the shafts of such a cart, he saw a thin little sorrel beast, one of those peasant nags which he had often seen straining their utmost under a heavy load of wood or hay, especially when the wheels were stuck in the mud or in a rut. And the peasants would beat them so cruelly, sometimes even about the nose and eyes, and he felt so sorry for them, that he almost cried, and his mother always used to take him away from the window. All of a sudden, there was a great uproar of shouting, singing, and the balalaika, and from the tavern a number of big and very drunken peasants came out, wearing red and blue shirts and coats thrown over their shoulders. "Get in! Get in!" shouted one of them, a young thick-necked peasant with a fleshy face red as a carrot. "I'll take you all, get in." But at once there's an outbreak of laughter and exclamations in the crowd. "Take us all with a beast like that? Why, Mikolka, are you crazy to put a nag like that in such a cart? And this mare is 20 if she is a day-mate's. Get in, I'll take you all," Mikolka shouted again, leaping first into the cart, seizing the reins and standing straight up in front. "The bay has gone with Matvey," he shouted from the cart, "and this brute Mates is just breaking my heart. I feel as if I could kill her. She's just eating her head off. Get in, I tell you. I'll make her gallop. She'll gallop." And he picked up the whip, preparing himself with relish to flog the little mare. "Get in! Come along!" The crowd laughed. "Do you hear? She'll gallop. Gallop indeed. She has not had a gallop in her for the last 10 years. She'll jog along. Don't you mind her, mates. Bring a whip, each of you. Get ready. All right, give it to her." They all clambered into Mikolka's cart, laughing and making jokes. 6 men got in, and there was still room for more. They hauled in a fat, rosy-cheeked woman. She was dressed in red cotton, in a pointed beaded headdress and thick leather shoes. She was cracking nuts and laughing. The crowd round them was laughing too, and indeed, how could they help laughing? That wretched nag was to drag all the cartload of them at a gallop. 2 young fellows in the cart were just getting whipped, ready to help Mikolka. With the cry of "now," the mare tugged with all her might, but far from galloping, could scarcely move forward. She struggled with her legs, gasping and shrinking from the blows of the 3 whips, which were showered upon her like hail. The laughter in the cart and in the crowd was redoubled, but Mikolka flew into a rage and furiously thrashed the mare, as though he supposed she really could gallop. "Let me get in too, mates," shouted a young man in the crowd, whose appetite was aroused. "Get in, all get in," cried Mikolka. "She will draw you all. I'll beat her to death." And he thrashed and thrashed at the mare, beside himself with fury. "Father, father," he cried. "Father, what are they doing?" "Father, they are beating the poor horse." Come along," said his father. "They are drunken and foolish, they are in fun. Come away, don't look." And he tried to draw him away, but he tore himself away from his hand, and beside himself with horror, ran to the horse. The poor beast was in a bad way. She was gasping, standing still, then tugging again, and almost falling. "Beat her to death," cried Mikolka. "It's come to that. I'll do for her." "What are you about? Are you a Christian, you devil?" shouted an old man in the crowd. "Did anyone ever see the like?" "A wretched nag like that, pulling such a cartload," said another. "You'll kill her," shouted the third. "Don't meddle. It's my property. I'll do what I choose. Get in, more of you. Get in, all of you. I will have her go at a gallop." All at once, laughter broke into a roar and covered everything. The mare, roused by the shower of blows, began feebly kicking. Even the old man could not help smiling. To think of a wretched little beast like that trying to kick! 2 lads in the crowd snatched up whips and ran to the mare to beat her about the ribs. One ran each side, hit her in the face, in the eyes. "In the eyes," cried Mikolka. "Give us a song, mates," shouted someone in the cart, and everyone in the cart joined in a riotous song, jingling a tambourine and whistling. The woman went on cracking nuts and laughing. He ran beside the mare, ran in front of her, saw her being whipped across the eyes, right in the eyes. He was crying. He felt choking. His tears were streaming. One of the men gave him a cut with the whip across the face. He did not feel it. Wringing his hands and screaming, he rushed up to the grey-headed old man with the grey beard, who was shaking his head in disapproval. One woman seized him by the hand and would have taken him away, but he tore himself from her and ran back to the mare. She was almost at the last gasp, but began kicking once more. "I teach you to kick!" Mikolka shouted ferociously. He threw down the whip, bent forward and picked up from the bottom of the cart a long thick shaft. He took hold of one end with both hands, and with an effort brandished it over the mare. "Hell crush her!" was shouted round him. "Hell kill her! It's my property!" shouted Mikolka, and brought the shaft down with a swinging blow. There was a sound of a heavy thud. "Thrash her! Thrash her! Why have you stopped?" shouted voices in the crowd, and Mikolka swung the shaft a second time, and it fell a second time on the spine of the luckless mare. She sank back on her haunches, but lurched forward and tugged forward with all her force, tugged first on one side and then on the other, trying to move the cart. But the 6 whips were attacking her in all directions, and the shaft was raised again and fell upon her a third time, then a fourth, with heavy measured blows. Mikolka was in a fury that he could not kill her at one blow. "She's a tough one," was shouted in the crowd. "Shell fall in a minute, mates. There will soon be an end of her," said an admiring spectator in the crowd. "Fetch an axe to her. Finish her off," shouted a third. "I'll show you." "Stand off," Mikolka screamed frantically. He threw down the shaft, stooped down in the cart, and picked up an iron crowbar. "Look out!" he shouted, and with all his might he dealt a stunning blow at the poor mare. The blow fell. The mare staggered, sank back, tried to pull, but the bar fell again with a swinging blow on her back, and she fell on the ground like a log. "Finish her off!" shouted Mikolka, and he leapt beside himself out of the cart. Several young men, also flushed with drink, seized anything they could come across, whips, sticks, poles, and ran to the dying mare. Mikolka stood on one side and began dealing random blows with the crowbar. The mare stretched out her head, drew a long breath, and died. "You butchered her!" someone shouted in the crowd. "Why wouldn't she gallop then?" "My property!" shouted Mikolka, with bloodshot eyes, brandishing the bar in his hands. He stood as though regretting that he had nothing more to beat. "No mistake about it, you are not a Christian!" Many voices were shouting in the crowd, but the poor boy beside himself made his way, screaming, through the crowd to the sorrel nag, put his arms round her bleeding dead head, and kissed it, kissed the eyes, and kissed the lips. Then he jumped up and flew in a frenzy, with his little fists out at Mikolka. At that instant, his father, who had been running after him, snatched him up and carried him out of the crowd. "Come along, come, let us go home," he said to him. "Father, why did they kill the poor horse?" He sobbed, but his voice broke, and the words came in shrieks from his panting chest. "They are drunk. They are brutal. It's not our business," said his father. He put his arms round his father, but he felt choked. He tried to draw a breath, to cry out, and woke up. He waked up, gasping for breath, his hair soaked with perspiration, and stood up in terror. "Thank God, that was only a dream," he said, sitting down under a tree and drawing deep breaths. "But what is it? Is it some fever coming on? Such a hideous dream." He felt utterly broken. Darkness and confusion were in his soul. He rested his elbows on his knees and leaned his head on his hands. "Good God!" he cried. Can it be that I shall really take an axe, that I shall strike her on the head, split her skull open, that I shall tread in the sticky warm blood, break the lock, steel and tremble, hide all spattered in the blood, with the axe? Good God, can it be?" He was shaking like a leaf as he said this. "But why am I going on like this?" he continued, sitting up again, as it were, in profound amazement. "I knew that I could never bring myself to it, so what have I been torturing myself for till now? Yesterday, when I went to make that experiment yesterday, I realized completely that I could never bear to do it. Why am I going over it again then? Why am I hesitating? As I came down the stairs yesterday, I said myself that it was base, loathsome, vile. The very thought of it made me feel sick and filled me with horror. No, I couldn't do it. Granted that there is no flaw in all that reasoning, that all that I have concluded this last month is clear as day, true as arithmetic. My God! Anyway, I couldn't bring myself to it. I couldn't do it. Why then am I still?" He rose to his feet, looked round in wonder as though surprised at finding himself in this place, and went towards the bridge. He was pale, his eyes glowed, he was exhausted in every limb, but he seemed suddenly to breathe more easily. He felt he had cast off that fearful burden that had so long been weighing upon him, and all at once there was a sense of relief and peace in his soul. "Lord," he prayed, "show me my path. I renounce that accursed dream of mine." Crossing the bridge, he gazed quietly and calmly at the Neva, at the glowing red sun setting in the glowing sky. In spite of his weakness, he was not conscious of fatigue. It was as though an abscess that had been forming for a month past in his heart had suddenly broken. Freedom! He was free from that spell, that sorcery, that obsession. Later on, when he recalled that time and all that happened to him during those days, minute by minute, point by point, he was superstitiously impressed by one circumstance, which, though in itself not very exceptional, always seemed to him afterwards the predestined turning point of his fate. He could never understand and explain to himself why, when he was tired and worn out, when it would have been more convenient for him to go home by the shortest and most direct way, he had returned by the Haymarket, where he had no need to go. It was obviously and quite unnecessarily out of his way, though not much so. It is true that it happened to him dozens of times to return home without noticing what streets he passed through. But why? He was always asking himself, why had such an important, such a decisive and at the same time such an absolutely chance meeting happened in the Haymarket, where he had, moreover, no reason to go at the very hour, the very minute of his life, when he was just in the very mood and in the very circumstances in which that meeting was able to exert the gravest and most decisive influence on his whole destiny, as though it had been lying in wait for him on purpose. It was about 9 o'clock when he crossed the Haymarket. At the tables and the barrows, at the booths and the shops, all the market people were closing their establishments, or clearing away and packing up their wares, and like their customers were going home. Rag pickers and costermongers of all kinds were crowding round the taverns in the dirty and stinking courtyards of the Haymarket. Raskolnikov particularly liked this place and the neighbouring alleys when he wandered aimlessly in the streets. Here his rags did not attract contemptuous attention, and one could walk about in any attire without scandalizing people. At the corner of an alley, a huckster and his wife had 2 tables set out with tapes, thread, cotton handkerchiefs, etc. They, too, had got up to go home, but were lingering in conversation with a friend who had just come up to them. This friend was Lizaveta Ivanovna, or, as everyone called her, Lizaveta, the younger sister of the old pawnbroker, Alyona Ivanovna, whom Raskolnikov had visited the previous day to pawn his watch and make his experiment. He already knew all about Lizaveta, and she knew him a little too. She was a single woman of about 35, tall, clumsy, timid, submissive, and almost idiotic. She was a complete slave, and went in fear and trembling of her sister, who made her work day and night, and even beat her. She was standing with a bundle before the huckster and his wife, listening earnestly and doubtfully. They were talking of something with special warmth. The moment Raskolnikov caught sight of her, he was overcome by a strange sensation, as it were of intense astonishment, though there was nothing astonishing about this meeting. "You could make up your mind for yourself, Lizaveta Ivanovna," the huckster was saying aloud. "Come round tomorrow about 7. They will be here too." "Tomorrow?" said Lizaveta slowly and thoughtfully, as though unable to make up her mind. "Upon my word, what a fright you are in of Alyona Ivanovna," gabbled the huckster's wife, a lively little woman. "I look at you, you are like some little babe, and she is not your own sister either, nothing but a stepsister, and what a hand she keeps over you. But this time don't say a word to Alyona Ivanovna," her husband interrupted. "That's my advice, but come round to us without asking. It will be worth your while. Later on, your sister herself may have a notion. Am I to come? About 7 o'clock tomorrow, and they will be here. You will be able to decide for yourself, and we'll have a cup of tea," added his wife. "All right, I'll come," said Lizaveta, still pondering, and she began slowly moving away. Raskolnikov had just passed and heard no more. He passed softly, unnoticed, trying not to miss a word. His first amazement was followed by a thrill of horror, like a shiver running down his spine. He had suddenly, quite unexpectedly learnt, that the next day, at 7 o'clock, Lizaveta, the old woman's sister and only companion, would be away from home, and that therefore at 7 o'clock precisely the old woman would be left alone. He was only a few steps from his lodging. He went in like a man condemned to death. He thought of nothing, and was incapable of thinking, but he felt suddenly in his whole being that he had no more freedom of thought, no will, and that everything was suddenly and irrevocably decided. Certainly, if he had to wait whole years for a suitable opportunity, he could not reckon on a more certain step towards the success of the plan than that which had just presented itself. In any case, it would have been difficult to find out beforehand, and with certainty, with greater exactness and less risk, and without dangerous inquiries and investigations, that next day at a certain time an old woman, on whose life an attempt was contemplated, would be at home and entirely alone. Chapter 6. Later on, Raskolnikov happened to find out why the huckster and his wife had invited Lizaveta. It was a very ordinary matter, and there was nothing exceptional about it. A family who had come to the town and been reduced to poverty were selling their household goods and clothes. All women's things, as the things would have fetched little in the market. They were looking for a dealer. This was Lizaveta's business. She undertook such jobs, and was frequently employed, as she was very honest, and always fixed a fair price, and stuck to it. She spoke as a rule little, and as we have said already, she was very submissive and timid. But Raskolnikov had become superstitious of late. The traces of superstition remained in him long after, and were almost ineradicable. And in all this, he was always afterwards disposed to see something strange and mysterious, as it were, the presence of some peculiar influences and coincidences. In the previous winter, a student he knew called Pokorev, who had left for Kharkov, had chanced in conversation to give him the address of Alyona Ivanovna, the old pawnbroker, in case he might want to pawn anything. For a long while he did not go to her, for he had lessons, and managed to get along somehow. 6 weeks ago he had remembered the address. He had 2 articles that could be pawned, his father's old silver watch, and a little gold ring with 3 red stones, a present from his sister at parting. He decided to take the ring. When he found the old woman, he had felt an insurmountable repulsion for her at the first glance, though he knew nothing special about her. He got 2 roubles from her and went into a miserable little tavern on his way home. He asked for tea, sat down, and sank into deep thought. A strange idea was pecking at his brain like a chicken in the egg, and very, very much absorbed him. Almost beside him at the next table there was sitting a student, whom he did not know and had never seen, and with him a young officer. They had played a game of billiards and began drinking tea. All at once he heard the student mention to the officer the pawnbroker Alyona Ivanovna, and give him her address. This of itself seemed strange to Raskolnikov. He had just come from her, and here at once he heard her name. Of course, it was a chance, but he could not shake off a very extraordinary impression, and here someone seemed to be speaking expressly for him. The student began telling his friend various details about Alyona Ivanovna. "She is first-rate," he said. "You can always get money from her. She is as rich as a Jew. She can give you 5,000 roubles at a time, and she is not above taking a pledge for a rouble. Lots of our fellows have had dealings with her, but she is an awful old harpy." And he began describing how spiteful and uncertain she was, how if you were only a day late with your interest, the pledge was lost, how she gave a quarter of the value of an article, and took 5 and even 7% a month on it, and so on. The student chattered on, saying that she had a sister Lizaveta, whom the wretched little creature was continually beating, and kept in complete bondage like a small child, though Lizaveta was at least 6 feet high. "There's a phenomenon for you," cried the student, and he laughed. They began talking about Lizaveta. The student spoke about her with a peculiar relish, and was continually laughing, and the officer listened with great interest, and asked him to send Lizaveta to do some mending for him. Raskolnikov did not miss a word, and learned everything about her. Lizaveta was younger than the old woman, and was her half-sister, being the child of a different mother. She was 35 days. She worked day and night for her sister, and besides doing the cooking and the washing, she did sewing and worked as a charwoman, and gave her sister all she earned. She did not dare to accept an order or job of any kind, without her sister's permission. The old woman had already made her will, and Lizaveta knew of it, and by this will she would not get a farthing, nothing but the movables, chairs, and so on. All the money was left to a monastery in the province of N, that prayers might be said for her in perpetuity. Lizaveta was of lower rank than her sister, unmarried and awfully uncouth in appearance, remarkably tall, with long feet that looked as if they were bent outwards. She always wore battered goatskin shoes and was clean in her person. What the student expressed most surprise and amusement about was the fact that Lizaveta was continually with child. "But you say she is hideous?" observed the officer. "Yes, she is so dark-skinned and looks like a soldier dressed up, but you know she is not at all hideous. She has such a good-natured face and eyes, strikingly so, and the proof of it is that lots of people are attracted by her. She is such a soft, gentle creature, ready to put up with anything, always willing to do anything, and her smile is really very sweet." "You seem to find her attractive yourself," laughed the officer. "From her queerness? No, I'll tell you what, I could kill that damned old woman and make off with her money, I assure you, without the faintest conscience prick," the student added with warmth. The officer laughed again, while Raskolnikov shuddered. How strange it was. "Listen, I want to ask you a serious question," the student said hotly. "I was joking, of course, but look here. On one side, we have a stupid, senseless, worthless, spiteful, ailing, horrid old woman, not simply useless but doing actual mischief, who has not an idea what she is living for herself, and who will die in a day or two in any case. You understand? You understand?" Yes, I understand," answered the officer, watching his excited companion attentively. "Well, listen then. On the other side, fresh young lives thrown away for want of help, and by thousands on every side. 100,000 good deeds could be done and helped on that old woman's money, which will be buried in a monastery. Hundreds, thousands perhaps, might be set on the right path. Dozens of families saved from destitution, from ruin, from vice, from the lock hospitals, and all with her money. Kill her, take her money, and with the help of it devote oneself to the service of humanity and the good of all. What do you think? Would not one tiny crime be wiped out by thousands of good deeds? For one life, thousands would be saved from corruption and decay. One death, and 100 lives in exchange. It's simple arithmetic. Besides, what value has the life of that sickly, stupid, ill-natured old woman in the balance of existence? No more than the life of a louse, of a black beetle. Less, in fact, because the old woman is doing harm. She is wearing out the lives of others. The other day she bit Lizaveta's finger out of spite. It almost had to be amputated. "Of course she does not deserve to live," remarked the officer. "But there it is, it's nature. Oh well, brother, but we have to correct and direct nature. And but for that, we should drown in an ocean of prejudice. But for that, there would never have been a single great man. They talk of duty, conscience. I don't want to say anything against duty and conscience. But the point is, what do we mean by them? Stay, I have another question to ask you. Listen. No, you stay. I'll ask you a question. Listen. Well, you are talking and speechifying away. But tell me, would you kill the old woman yourself? Of course not. I was only arguing the justice of it. It's nothing to do with me. But I think if you would not do it yourself, there's no justice about it. Let us have another game. Raskolnikov was violently agitated. Of course, it was all ordinary youthful talk and thought, such as he had often heard before in different forms and on different themes. But why had he happened to hear such a discussion and such ideas at the very moment when his own brain was just conceiving the very same ideas? And why, just at the moment when he had brought away the embryo of his idea from the old woman, had he dropped at once upon a conversation about her? This coincidence always seemed strange to him. This trivial talk in a tavern had an immense influence on him in his later action, as though there had really been in it something preordained, some guiding hint. On returning from the Haymarket, he flung himself on the sofa and sat for a whole hour without stirring. Meanwhile it got dark. He had no candle, and indeed it did not occur to him to light up. He could never recollect whether he had been thinking about anything at that time. At last he was conscious of his former fever and shivering, and he realized with relief that he could lie down on the sofa. Soon heavy, leaden sleep came over him, as it were crushing him. He slept an extraordinarily long time, and without dreaming. Nastasia, coming into his room at 10 o'clock the next morning, had difficulty in rousing him. She brought him in tea and bread. The tea was again the second brew, and again in her own teapot. "My goodness, how he sleeps!" she cried indignantly. "And he is always asleep." He got up with an effort. His head ached. He stood up, took a turn in his garret, and sank back on the sofa again. "Going to sleep again?" cried Nastasia. "Are you ill, eh?" He made no reply. "Do you want some tea?" "Afterwards," he said with an effort, closing his eyes again and turning to the wall. Nastasia stood over him. "Perhaps he really is ill," she said, turned and went out. She came in again at 2 o'clock with soup. He was lying as before. The tea stood untouched. Nastasia felt positively offended and began wrathfully rousing him. "Why are you lying like a log?" she shouted, looking at him with repulsion. He got up and sat down again, but said nothing, and stared at the floor. "Are you ill or not?" asked Nastasia, and again received no answer. "You'd better go out and get a breath of air," she said after a pause. "Will you eat it or not?" "Afterwards," he said weakly. "You can go," and he motioned her out. She remained a little longer, looked at him with compassion, and went out. A few minutes afterwards, he raised his eyes and looked for a long while at the tea and the soup. Then he took the bread, took up a spoon, and began to eat. He ate a little, 3 or 4 spoonfuls, without appetite, as it were mechanically. His head ached less. After his meal he stretched himself on the sofa again, but now he could not sleep. He lay without stirring, with his face in the pillow. He was haunted by daydreams, and such strange daydreams. In one that kept recurring, he fancied that he was in Africa, in Egypt, in some sort of oasis. The caravan was resting. The camels were peacefully lying down. The palms stood all around in a complete circle. All the party were at dinner. But he was drinking water from a spring which flowed gurgling close by, and it was so cool. It was wonderful, wonderful, blue, cold water running among the party-coloured stones and over the clean sand which glistened here and there like gold. Suddenly he heard a clock strike. He started, roused himself, raised his head, looked out of the window, and seeing how late it was, suddenly jumped up wide awake as though someone had pulled him off the sofa. He crept on tiptoe to the door, stealthily opened it, and began listening on the staircase. His heart beat terribly, but all was quiet on the stairs, as if everyone was asleep. It seemed to him strange and monstrous that he could have slept in such forgetfulness from the previous day, and had done nothing, had prepared nothing yet, and meanwhile perhaps it had struck 6, and his drowsiness and stupefaction were followed by an extraordinary feverish, as it were distracted haste. But the preparations to be made were few. He concentrated all his energies on thinking of everything, and forgetting nothing, and his heart kept beating and thumping, so that he could hardly breathe. First he had to make a noose and sew it into his overcoat, a work of a moment. He rummaged under his pillow, and picked out amongst the linen, stuffed away under it, a worn-out, old unwashed shirt. From its rags he tore a long strip, a couple of inches wide, and about 16 inches long. He folded this strip in 2, took off his wide, strong summer overcoat of some stout cotton material, his only outer garment, and began sewing the two ends of the rag on the inside, under the left armhole. His hands shook as he sewed, but he did it successfully, so that nothing showed outside when he put the coat on again. The needle and thread he had got ready long before, and they lay on his table in a piece of paper. As for the noose, it was a very ingenious device of his own. The noose was intended for the axe. It was impossible for him to carry the axe through the street in his hands, and if hidden under his coat, he would still have had to support it with his hand, which would have been noticeable. Now he had only to put the head of the axe in the noose, and it would hang quietly under his arm on the inside. Putting his hand in his coat pocket, he could hold the end of the handle all the way, so that it did not swing, and as the coat was very full, a regular sack in fact, it could not be seen from outside that he was holding something, with the hand that he was holding something, with the hand that was in the pocket. This noose, too, he had designed a fortnight before. When he had finished with this, he thrust his hand into a little opening between his sofa and the floor, fumbled in the left corner, and drew out the pledge which he had got ready long before and hidden there. This pledge was, however, only a smoothly planed piece of wood the size and thickness of a silver cigarette case. He picked up this piece of wood in one of his wanderings in a courtyard where there was some sort of a workshop. Afterwards, he had added to the wood a thin, smooth piece of iron, which he had also picked up at the same time in the street. Putting the iron, which was a little the smaller on the piece of wood, he fastened them very firmly, crossing and recrossing the thread round them, then wrapped them carefully and daintily in clean white paper and tied up the parcel so that it would be very difficult to untie it. This was in order to divert the attention of the old woman for a time while she was trying to undo the knot, and so to gain a moment. The iron strip was added to give weight, so that the woman might not guess the first minute that the thing was made of wood. All this had been stored by him beforehand under the sofa. He had only just got the pledge out when he heard someone suddenly about in the yard. It struck 6, long ago. Long ago, my God. He rushed to the door, listened, caught up his hat, and began to descend his 13 steps cautiously, noiselessly, like a cat. He had still the most important thing to do, to steal the axe from the kitchen. That the deed must be done with an axe he had decided long ago. He had also a pocket pruning knife, but he could not rely on the knife, and still less on his own strength, and so resolved finally on the axe. We may note in passing one peculiarity in regard to all the final resolutions taken by him in the matter. They had one strange characteristic. The more final they were, the more hideous and the more absurd they at once became in his eyes. In spite of all his agonizing inward struggle, he never for a single instant all that time could believe in the carrying out of his plans. And indeed, if it had ever happened that everything, to the least point, could have been considered and finally settled, and no uncertainty of any kind had remained, he would, it seems, have renounced it all as something absurd, monstrous, and impossible. But a whole mass of unsettled points and uncertainties remained. As for getting the axe, that trifling business cost him no anxiety, for nothing could be easier. Nastasia was continually out of the house, especially in the evenings. She would run into the neighbours or to a shop, and always left the door ajar. It was the one thing the landlady was always scolding her about, and so when the time came, he would only have to go quietly into the kitchen, and to take the axe, and an hour later, when everything was over, go in and put it back again. But these were doubtful points. Supposing he returned an hour later to put it back, and Nastasia had come back and was on the spot, he would of course have to go by and wait till she went out again. But supposing she were in the meantime to miss the axe, look for it, make an outcry, that would mean suspicion, or at least grounds for suspicion. But those were all trifles which he had not even begun to consider, and indeed he had no time. He was thinking of the chief point, and put off trifling details until he could believe in it all. But that seemed utterly unattainable. So it seemed to himself, at least. He could not imagine, for instance, that he would sometime leave off thinking, get up and simply go there. Even his late experiment, i.e., his visit with the object of a final survey of the place, was simply an attempt at an experiment, far from being the real thing, as though one should say, "Come, let us go and try it. Why dream about it?" And at once he had broken down, and had run away, cursing, in a frenzy with himself. Meanwhile, it would seem, as regards the moral question, that his analysis was complete. His casuistry had become keen as a razor, and he could not find rational objections in himself. But, in the last resort, he simply ceased to believe in himself, and doggedly, slavishly sought arguments in all directions, fumbling for them, as though someone were forcing and drawing him to it. At first, long before indeed, he had been much occupied with one question: why almost all crimes are so badly concealed and so easily detected, and why almost all criminals leave such obvious traces. He had come gradually to many different and curious conclusions, and in his opinion, the chief reason lay not so much in the material impossibility of concealing the crime, as in the criminal himself. Almost every criminal is subject to a failure of will and reasoning power by a childish and phenomenal heedlessness, at the very instant when prudence and caution are most essential. It was his conviction that this eclipse of reason and failure of will-power attacked a man like a disease, developed gradually, and reached its highest point just before the perpetration of the crime, continued with equal violence at the moment of the crime, and for longer or shorter time after, according to the individual case, and then passed off like any other disease. The question whether the disease gives rise to the crime, or whether the crime from its own peculiar nature is always accompanied by something of the nature of disease, he did not yet feel able to decide. When he reached these conclusions, he decided that in his own case there could not be such a morbid reaction, that his reason and will would remain unimpaired at the time of carrying out his design, for the simple reason that his design was not a crime. We will omit all the process by means of which he arrived at this last conclusion. We have run too far ahead already. We may add only that the practical, purely material difficulties of the affair occupied a secondary position in his mind. One has but to keep all one's will power and reason to deal with them, and they will all be overcome at the time when once one has familiarized oneself with the minutest details of the business. But this preparation had never been begun. His final decisions were what he came to trust least, and when the hour struck, it all came to pass quite differently, as it were accidentally and unexpectedly. One trifling circumstance upset his calculations before he had even left the staircase. When he reached the landlady's kitchen, the door of which was open as usual, he glanced cautiously in to see whether, in Nastasia's absence, the landlady herself was there, or if not, whether the door to her own room was closed, so that she might not peep out when he went in for the axe. But what was his amazement when he suddenly saw that Nastasia was not only at home in the kitchen, but was occupied there, taking linen out of a basket and hanging it on a line. Seeing him, she left off hanging the clothes, turned to him, and stared at him all the time he was passing. He turned away his eyes and walked past as though he noticed nothing. But it was the end of everything. He had not the axe. He was overwhelmed. What made me think, he reflected, as he went under the gateway, what made me think that she would be sure not to be at home at that moment? Why did I assume this so certainly? He was crushed and even humiliated. He could have laughed at himself in his anger. A dull animal rage boiled within him. He stood hesitating in the gateway. To go into the street, to go a walk for appearance' sake was revolting. To go back to his room, even more revolting. And what a chance I have lost forever, he muttered, standing aimlessly in the gateway, just opposite the porter's little dark room, which was also open. Suddenly he started. From the porter's room, 2 paces away from him. Something shining under the bench to the right caught his eye. He looked about him. Nobody. He approached the room on tiptoe, went down 2 steps into it, and in a faint voice called the porter. Yes, not at home. Somewhere near, though, in the yard, for the door is wide open. He dashed to the axe. It was an axe, and pulled it out from under the bench, where it lay between 2 chunks of wood. At once, before going out, he made it fast in the noose. He thrust both hands into his pockets and went out of the room. No one had of the room noticed him. When reason fails, the devil helps, he thought with a strange grin. This chance raised his spirits extraordinarily. He walked along quietly and sedately, without hurry, to avoid awakening suspicion. He scarcely looked at the passers-by, tried to escape looking at their faces at all, and to be as little noticeable as possible. Suddenly he thought of his hat. Good heavens! I had the money the day before yesterday, and did not get a cap to wear instead. A curse rose from the bottom of his soul. Glancing out of the corner of his eye into a shop, he saw by a clock on the wall that it was 10 minutes past 7. He had to make haste, and at the same time to go some way round, so as to approach the house from the other side. When he had happened to imagine all this beforehand, he had sometimes thought that he would be very much afraid. But he was not very much afraid now, was not afraid at all indeed. His mind was even occupied by irrelevant matters, but by nothing for long. As he passed the Yusupov garden, he was deeply absorbed in considering the building of great fountains, and of their refreshing effect on the atmosphere in all the squares. By degrees he passed to the conviction that if the summer garden were extended to the field of Mars, and perhaps joined to the garden of the Mihailovsky Palace, it would be a splendid thing and a great benefit to the town. Then he was interested by the question, why in all great towns men are not simply driven by necessity, but in some peculiar way inclined to live in those parts of the town where there are no gardens nor fountains, where there is most dirt and smell and all sorts of nastiness. Then his own walks through the Haymarket came back to his mind, and for a moment he waked up to reality. What nonsense, he thought, better think of nothing at all. So probably men led to execution clutch mentally at every object that meets them on the way. Flashed through his mind, but simply flashed like lightning. He made haste to dismiss this thought, and by now he was near. Here was the house, here was the gate. Suddenly a clock somewhere struck once. What? Can it be 7:30? Impossible, it must be fast. Luckily for him, everything went well again at the gates. At that very moment, as though expressly for his benefit, a huge wagon of hay had just driven in at the gate, completely screening him as he passed under the gateway, and the wagon had scarcely had time to drive through into the yard before he had slipped in a flash to the right. On the other side of the wagon he could hear shouting and quarrelling, but no one noticed him, and no one met him. Many windows looking into that huge quadrangular yard were open at that moment, but he did not raise his head. He had not the strength to. The staircase leading to the old woman's room was close by, just on the right of the gateway. He was already on the stairs, drawing a breath, pressing his hand against his throbbing heart, and once more feeling for the axe and setting it straight. He began softly and cautiously ascending the stairs, listening every minute. But the stairs, too, were quite deserted. All the doors were shut. He met no one. One flat, indeed, on the first floor, was wide open, and painters were at work in it, but they did not glance at him. He stood still, thought a minute, and went on. Of course it would be better if they had not been here, but it's 2 stories above them, and there was the 4th story. Here was the door, here was the flat opposite, the empty one. The flat underneath the old woman's was apparently empty also. The visiting card nailed on the door had been torn off. They had gone away. He was out of breath. For one instant the thought floated through his mind, shall I go back? But he made no answer, and began listening at the old woman's door. A dead silence. Then he listened again on the staircase, listened long and intently, then looked about him for the last time, pulled himself together, drew himself up, and once more tried the axe in the noose. Am I very pale? He wondered. Am I not evidently agitated? She's mistrustful. Had I better wait a little longer, till my heart leaves off thumping? But his heart did not leave off. On the contrary, as though to spite him, it throbbed more and more violently. He could stand it no longer. He slowly put out his hand to the bell and rang. Half a minute later he rang again, more loudly. No answer. To go on ringing was useless and out of place. The old woman was of course at home, but she was suspicious and alone. He had some knowledge of her habits, and once more he put his ear to the door. Either his senses were peculiarly keen, which it is difficult to suppose, or the sound was really very distinct. Anyway, he suddenly heard something like the cautious touch of a hand on the lock and the rustle of a skirt at the very door. Someone was standing stealthily close to the lock, and just as he was doing, on the outside, was secretly listening within, and seemed to have her ear to the door. He moved a little on purpose, and muttered something aloud, that he might not have the appearance of hiding, then rang a third time, but quietly, soberly, and without impatience. Recalling it afterwards, that moment stood out in his mind vividly, distinctly, forever. He could not make out how he had had such cunning, for his mind was, as it were, clouded at moments, and he was almost unconscious of his body. An instant later he heard the latch unfasten. Chapter 7. The door was as before opened, a tiny crack, and again 2 sharp and suspicious eyes stared at him out of the darkness. Then Raskolnikov lost his head and nearly made a great mistake, fearing the old woman would be frightened by their being alone, and not hoping that the sight of him would disarm her suspicions. He took hold of the door and drew it towards him to prevent the old woman from attempting to shut it again. Seeing this, she did not pull the door back, but she did not let go the handle, so that he almost dragged her out with it onto the stairs. Seeing that she was standing in the doorway, not allowing him to pass, he advanced straight upon her. She stepped back in alarm, tried to say something, but seemed unable to speak, and stared with open eyes at him. "Good evening, Alyona Ivanovna," he began, trying to speak easily, but his voice would not obey him. It broke and shook. "I have come. I have brought something. But we'd better come in to the light." And leaving her, he passed straight into the room, uninvited. The old woman ran after him. Her tongue was unloosed. "Good heavens, what it is? Who is it? What do you want?" "Why, Alyona Ivanovna, you know me, Raskolnikov. Here, I brought you the pledge I promised the other day." And he held out the pledge. The old woman glanced for a moment at the pledge, but at once stared in the eyes of her uninvited visitor. She looked intently, maliciously, and mistrustfully. A minute passed. He even fancied something like a sneer in her eyes, as though she had already guessed everything. He felt that he was losing his head, that he was almost frightened, so frightened that if she were to look like that and not say a word for another half-minute, he thought he would have run away from her. "Why do you look at me, as though you did not know me?" he said suddenly, also with malice. "Take it if you like. If not, I'll go elsewhere. I am in a hurry." He had not even thought of saying this, but it was suddenly said of itself. The old woman recovered herself, and her visitor's resolute tone evidently restored her confidence. "But why, my good sir, all of a minute? What is it?" she asked, looking at the pledge. "The silver cigarette case. I spoke of it last time, you know." She held out her hand. "But how pale you are, to be sure, and your hands are trembling too. Have you been bathing, or what?" "Fever," he answered abruptly. "You can't help getting pale. If you've nothing to eat," he added, with difficulty articulating the words. His strength was failing him again, but his answer sounded like the truth. The old woman took the pledge. "What is it?" she asked once more, scanning Raskolnikov intently. and weighing the pledge in her hand. A thin cigarette case, silver, tall. Look at it. It does not seem somehow like silver. How he has wrapped it up. Trying to untie the string and turning to the window, to the light. All her windows were shut. In spite of the stifling heat, she left him altogether for some seconds and stood with her back to him. He unbuttoned his coat and freed the axe from the noose, but did not yet take it out altogether, simply holding it in his right hand under the coat. His hands were fearfully weak. He felt them every moment growing more numb and more wooden. He was afraid he would let the axe slip and fall. A sudden giddiness came over him. But what has he tied it up like this for? The old woman cried with vexation and moved towards him. He had not a minute more to lose. He pulled the axe quite out, swung it with both arms, scarcely conscious of himself, and almost without effort, almost mechanically, brought the blunt side down on her head. He seemed not to use his own strength in this. But as soon as he had once brought the axe down, his strength returned to him. The old woman was as always bareheaded. Her thin light hair, streaked with grey, thickly smeared with grease, was plaited in a rat's tail and fastened by a broken horn comb which stood out on the nape of her neck. As she was so short, the blow fell on the very top of her skull. She cried out, but very faintly, and suddenly sank all of a heap on the floor, raising her hands to her head. In one hand she still held the pledge. Then he dealt her another and another blow with the blunt side, and on the same spot. The blood gushed as from an overturned glass. The body fell back. He stepped back, let it fall, and at once bent over her face. She was dead. Her eyes seemed to be starting out of their sockets. The brow and the whole face were drawn and contortively. Ununcio. He laid the axe on the ground, near the dead body, and felt at once in her pocket, trying to avoid the streaming body. The same right-hand pocket from which she had taken the key on his last visit. He was in full possession of his faculties, free from confusion or giddiness, but his hands were still trembling. He remembered afterwards that he had been particularly collected and careful, trying all the time not to get smeared with blood. He pulled out the keys at once. They were all, as before, in one bunch on a steel ring. He ran at once into the bedroom with them. It was a very small room, with a whole shrine of holy images. Against the other wall stood a big bed, very clean and covered with a silk patchwork wadded quilt. Against a third wall was a chest of drawers. Strange to say, so soon as he began to fit the keys into the chest, so soon as he heard their jingling, a convulsive shudder passed over him. He suddenly felt tempted again to give it all up and go away, but that was only for an instant. It was too late to go back. He positively smiled at himself, when suddenly another terrifying idea occurred to his mind. He suddenly fancied that the old woman might be still alive and might recover her senses. Leaving the keys in the chest, he ran back to the body, snatched up the axe and lifted it once more over the old woman, but did not bring it down. There was no doubt that she was dead. Bending down and examining her again more closely, he saw clearly that the skull was broken and even battered in on one side. He was about to feel it with his finger, but drew back his hand, and indeed it was evident without that. Meanwhile there was a perfect pool of blood. All at once he noticed a string on her neck. He tugged at it, but the string was strong and did not snap, and besides, it was soaked with blood. He tried to pull it out from the front of the dress, but something held it and prevented its coming. In his impatience he raised the axe again to cut the string from above on the body, but did not dare, and with difficulty, smearing his hand and the axe in the blood, after 2 minutes' hurried effort, he cut the string and took it off without touching the body with the axe. He was not mistaken. It was a purse. On the string were 2 crosses, one of cypress wood and one of copper, and an image in silver filigree, and with them a small greasy chamois leather purse with a steel rim and ring. The purse was stuffed very full. Raskolnikov thrust it in his pocket without looking at it, flung the crosses on the old woman's body, and rushed back into the bedroom, this time taking the axe with him. He was in terrible haste. He snatched the keys and began trying them again, but he was unsuccessful. They would not fit in the locks. It was not so much that his hands were shaking, but that he kept making mistakes, though he saw, for instance, that a key was not the right one and would not fit. Still he tried to put it in. Suddenly he remembered, and realized that the big key with the deep notches, which was hanging there with the small keys, could not possibly belong to the chest of drawers on his last visit. This had struck him, but to some strong box, and that to some strong box. Everything perhaps was hidden in that box. He left the chest of drawers, and at once felt under the bedstead, knowing that old women usually keep boxes under their beds, and so it was. There was a good-sized box under the bed, at least a yard in length, with an arched lid covered with red leather and studded with steel nails. At the top, under a white sheet, was a coat of red brocade lined with hareskin. Under it was a silk dress, then a shawl, and it seemed as though there was nothing below but clothes. First thing he did was to wipe his blood-stained hands on the red brocade.